This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never really talked about this publicly before, but after years of keeping it mostly between family and close friends, I think I'm ready to share what happened in our house in Bloomfield. I'm 22 now, but I was just 10 when we moved into that suburban house and everything started. It was my little brother Alex who first saw her. He was only 6 at the time, and kids that age usually have pretty active imaginations, so none of us thought much of it when he mentioned seeing a girl with glasses standing by my bedroom window. Mom just nodded and went back to unpacking boxes, and I rolled my eyes like any annoyed older sister would, but then he kept seeing her. "Emma, the girl was watching you sleep again," he told me one morning about 2 weeks after we moved in. I remember feeling this weird shiver run down my spine, but I played it cool. "What girl, Alex? There's no girl." "The one with the glasses and hair like this," he said, pointing to his shoulders to show the length. "She stands by your window and looks at you." I tried to laugh it off, but that night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at my window, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. Nothing happened, and eventually I convinced myself it was just Alex being weird. About a month later, my older sister Lily and I switched bedrooms. She wanted the bigger one with better light for her art projects, and I didn't really care either way. The first night in my new room, I woke up around 3 in the morning to a distinct knocking on my window. Not like a tree branch scraping glass. This was deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I froze under my covers, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I was literally paralyzed with fear. The worst part? My new bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and there was a steep drop outside with no ledge. No one could possibly reach that window without a really tall ladder. When morning came, I convinced myself it had been a dream. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to look like a baby. But 3 nights later, it happened again while Lily was hanging out in my room. We were just talking about school stuff when we heard it. Knock, knock, knock on the window. We both went silent. Lily's eyes got huge. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. It happened the other night too. This time Lily was brave enough to actually look. She pulled back the curtain really fast, like she was trying to catch someone, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and the roof of our porch below, way too far down for anyone to reach up and knock. We told our parents, who checked outside with flashlights but found nothing. Dad said it was probably just the house settling or birds hitting the glass. But birds don't knock 3 times in a row, and houses don't make knocking sounds on windows. That's when we started calling her Rosie. I don't even remember who came up with the name. I think it was Lily. But somehow giving her a name made it less scary. Like, okay, we have a ghost, but at least she has a name now. The knocking incidents were just the beginning. One afternoon I was doing homework on my bed with my cat Pepper sleeping next to me. I got up to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, my school papers were rustling and moving across the bedspread. Not like they were being blown by wind. They were sliding across the bed like someone was pushing them with their hand. Pepper was still fast asleep, and all the windows were closed. No fan was on, no AC vent nearby, nothing that could explain it. I just stood in the doorway watching my math homework reorganize itself. I wasn't even scared in that moment, just completely confused. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, but it was happening right in front of me. When I told Lily about it that night, she finally confessed she'd been experiencing weird things too. Once while studying, a pencil flew off her desk shelf, not fell, flew, with enough force that it hit the opposite wall. Another time, her hairbrush moved from one side of her dresser to the other while she was in the shower. The longer we lived there, the more frequent these incidents became. Kitchen cabinets would be closed when we went to bed and wide open in the morning. The TV in the living room would turn on by itself at random times. My bedroom door would slowly swing open even when it was firmly shut. I remember one afternoon I was home alone doing laundry in the basement. I had just loaded the washing machine when I heard footsteps overhead. Clear as day, someone walking across the kitchen floor. My heart nearly stopped. I knew I was supposed to be alone. I stood there at the bottom of the stairs, debating whether to call the police or my mum, when I heard a cabinet door slam. I grabbed a baseball bat we kept near the basement door and crept upstairs, phone in hand, ready to dial 911. When I reached the kitchen, every single cabinet door was open. Every single one, and the room was empty. I ran outside and waited on the front porch until my mom got home from work. When I showed her the cabinets, she just sighed and said, "Rosie must be looking for something." By this point, it had been almost a year of strange occurrences, and we'd all just sort of accepted it. I know that sounds crazy, but what else could we do? We couldn't afford to move, and besides, Rosie never seemed malicious, just mischievous and maybe a little lonely. One of the weirdest incidents happened when I was 14. My boyfriend Marcus was over, and we were watching a movie in the living room. My parents and siblings were out at my brother's baseball game. Suddenly, we heard what sounded like metal dragging across the floor upstairs, followed by heavy footsteps. Marcus looked at me. "Is someone else home?" "No," I whispered. "It's just Rosie." He didn't believe in ghosts and insisted on checking it out. We went upstairs together, and when we reached the kitchen, we found 3 metal baking sheets scattered across the floor. They'd been stored in a cabinet under the oven, a cabinet that was now wide open. Marcus tried to explain it away. Maybe they were balanced precariously and finally fell, but that didn't explain the dragging sound or the footsteps. He left pretty quickly after that and didn't come over again for weeks. The incidents I remember most vividly all happened within one particular day. A Saturday in October when I was 15. That morning I was in the shower when I distinctly felt someone tug on the shower curtain. I peeked out, expecting to see my little brother playing a prank, but the bathroom was empty and the door was still locked from the inside. Later that afternoon, I was in the living room with my mom and Lily when the entire cable box suddenly shut down in the middle of a show we were watching. No power outage, no warning, it just died. I remember rolling my eyes and saying sarcastically, "Come on, Rosie, turn it back on." And I swear to God, the box immediately lit up and started rebooting. My mum and sister looked at me with wide eyes, and we all just sat there in silence watching the loading bar creep across the screen. It was the first time Rosie had ever responded to us directly, and it was honestly terrifying. That night, I had 2 friends sleeping over, Jess and Kayla. We were all camped out in the guest room because it had more floor space for sleeping bags. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to what felt like someone tugging on my blanket. At first, I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, but they were both sound asleep across the room. The blanket moved again, a distinct pull from the bottom corner. I sat up, fully awake now, and whispered, "Rosie?" The tugging stopped immediately. I lay back down, heart racing, and tried to convince myself I'd dreamed it. But then I felt someone, sit down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under the weight. I could feel the pressure against my leg. I was too terrified to move or even breathe. I just lay there, eyes squeezed shut, praying for morning to come. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the weight lifted and I felt cold air rush over me as if someone had just stood up and walked away. The next morning I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. My friends left after breakfast and I found myself alone in the house again while everyone ran errands. Marcus came over with his new puppy, a little brown terrier named Baxter. We were in the living room and Baxter was running around exploring everything. Marcus had brought one of those interactive dog toys that make sounds when touched. He placed it on the floor and Baxter sniffed it curiously, but then got distracted by something else and ran across the room. As the puppy sprinted past the toy, without touching it, the toy suddenly announced in its robotic voice, "Run, little dog, run!" Marcus and I both froze. The toy shouldn't have activated without being touched, and even if it had somehow malfunctioned, that particular phrase wasn't even part of its programming. Later that same day, my mom came upstairs from her basement bedroom looking pale. She described waking up in the middle of the night to see a dim, basketball-sized ball of light hovering over her dresser. The basement was completely dark, no windows, no electronics, no explanation for the light. She watched it for almost a minute before it simply faded away. That was the day I knew for certain we weren't alone in our house. I've had many paranormal experiences since then, doors closing, lights flickering, objects moving, but nothing has ever matched the intensity of that single day when Rosie seemed determined to make her presence known to everyone. We lived in that house for 8 more years. The activity never completely stopped. Sometimes we'd go weeks without incident, and then suddenly there'd be a flurry of strange occurrences. But after that intense day, we all made a kind of peace with it. We'd acknowledge Rosie when weird things happened. "Okay, Rosie, very funny," or "Rosie, please stop, you're scaring the cat." I moved out 3 years ago for college, but my parents and brother still live there. Alex doesn't see her anymore, but they still find cabinets open and lights turned on. I asked my mom once if she was afraid, and she just shrugged and said, "Rosie was here before us, and she'll be here after us. This is her home too." I still don't know who Rosie was or why she's in our house. I've looked up the property records and found nothing about a young girl dying there. Sometimes I wonder if she's not tied to the house at all, but to one of us. Whatever the case, she's as much a part of my childhood memories as anything else. The ghost with glasses who watched over us, knocked on windows and just wanted to be acknowledged. Story 2. I still have nightmares about that house. It's been 15 years now, but sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat thinking I'm back there again. I never believed in ghosts before we moved to Mary Hill. Now I don't know what to believe. We moved into that beautiful 2-story house during the summer of 2008. It was supposed to be our dream home, spacious, with this amazing circular layout downstairs that made the place feel so open and welcoming. The kitchen was incredible, with granite countertops and brand new appliances. My brother Tim and I had our own rooms upstairs, across the hall from each other. It was perfect. At least, that's what we thought. The first incident happened about 3 weeks after we moved in. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone with my door wide open. It was around 9 at night, and I remember the hallway light was on. Tim's door was open too, and I could see him at his desk playing some computer game. That's when I saw it. Something ran past my doorway toward the bathroom. It moved so fast I couldn't make out what it was, just a dark blur of movement. I jumped up, thinking maybe it was Mom or Dad, but I knew they were both downstairs watching TV. "Tim?" I called out. "Did you see that?" He was sitting completely still, staring at his doorway. His face had gone pale. "Whatever it was," he said in a low voice, "I don't even want to think about it." That night we both closed our bedroom doors for the first time since moving in. We never talked about what we saw, but after that, our doors stayed closed every night. Things were quiet for a few weeks after that. I started to think maybe it had been nothing, a trick of the light, my imagination running wild. Then Mom's friend Diane came to stay with us for a couple weeks while she was between apartments. She took the guest bedroom upstairs, right next to the bathroom. After just a few days, I noticed Diane looking exhausted every morning. She was spending more and more time downstairs, only going up to her room when she absolutely had to. One night, we were sitting in the living room watching a movie when everyone else had gone to bed. I decided to ask her if everything was okay. "Hey, Diane, can I ask you something weird?" She looked at me with these tired eyes. "Sure, honey." "Have you noticed anything strange about your room?" Her whole body tensed up. "What do you mean by strange?" I hesitated, then told her about the figure I'd seen running past my door. I expected her to laugh it off, but instead she froze. "I feel something in that house," she whispered, leaning closer to me. "I hate sleeping in that room. It's always so cold, no matter how high I turn up the heat, and sometimes..." She trailed off. "Sometimes what?" I pressed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched." That night, We stayed up late watching TV in her room. I was trying to help her feel less scared, though I was pretty freaked out myself. We must have fallen asleep with the TV on because I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. The room was freezing cold, and there it was, a dark, angry figure hovering at the foot of the bed. It wasn't quite solid, more like a dense shadow with vague human features. But the rage. I could feel the rage coming off it in waves. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I felt Diane's hand grip mine under the blanket. "I see it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Close your eyes and it'll go away." I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. When I opened them again, maybe 30 seconds later, the figure was gone, but the cold remained. We didn't say another word. We just grabbed our pillows and ran downstairs to sleep on the couches in the living room. The next morning, my mum found us there and demanded to know what happened. Diane was packing her things before breakfast. When Mom kept pushing for answers, I finally broke down and told her everything. The running figure, the hovering shadow, how cold the guest room always was. That's when Mom got this look on her face. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "I didn't want to tell you kids this," she said slowly. "The real estate agent told us right before we closed on the house. The previous owner, he committed suicide in that bedroom." My blood went cold. "What?" "He shot himself. The agent said they repaired and repainted everything, but..." She looked uncomfortable. "There's still a mark on the wall where the bullet went in." I felt sick. The night before, while watching TV with Diane, I'd noticed a small circular indentation in the wall beside the closet. I'd assumed it was just a flaw in the drywall. Now I realized what I'd been looking at. Diane moved out that day. My parents tried to act like everything was normal, but Tim and I knew better. We started spending as much time as possible away from the house. About a week after Diane left, Tim and I were playing basketball in the driveway. It was getting dark, but neither of us wanted to go inside yet. I remember taking a shot and missing badly. The ball bounced off the rim and rolled toward the side of the house. As I went to retrieve it, I glanced up at the windows. What I saw made my entire body go cold. There, in the guest bedroom window, was the dark figure of a man. Not a shadow this time. A man with his hand raised against his head, in the position of holding a gun. I screamed for Tim. He ran over and saw it too. We both stood there frozen, watching as the figure slowly turned its head to look down at us. Then it vanished. We ran inside, hysterical, trying to explain to our parents what we'd seen. Dad, who had always been the skeptic, tried to calm us down. He said it was probably just our imaginations, fueled by what Mom had told us about the previous owner. But 2 nights later, Dad came downstairs at breakfast looking like he hadn't slept. When Mom asked what was wrong, he just shook his head at first. Finally, he admitted that he'd gotten up to use the bathroom around 2 in the morning and seen someone standing at their bedroom door. He'd called out, thinking it was one of us kids, but the figure had simply vanished. We moved out 2 weeks later. Dad broke our lease and paid the penalty. Mom found us a new place on the other side of town, and we never spoke about the Mary Hill house again. Sometimes I drive by it when I'm back in town. There's a new family living there now. I wonder if they've seen him. The man at the window, the shadow at the foot of the bed, the blur running down the hallway. I wonder if they know about the mark on the wall in the guest bedroom. I've tried researching the previous owner to find out why he did it, why his spirit seemed so angry, but there wasn't much in the local papers, just a short obituary. A man in his 40s, no family mentioned, no details about his life, just another tragedy that nobody talks about. The worst part is the dreams. They started a few months after we moved out. In them, I'm always back in that house, standing in the guest bedroom, staring at that mark on the wall, and I feel this overwhelming sadness and rage that isn't mine. Sometimes I'm looking out the window, watching myself playing in the yard below. Sometimes I'm running down the hallway, trying to get someone's attention, but no one can really see me. I've told my therapist about the house, but not about the dreams. I'm afraid of what they might mean. I'm afraid that somehow a piece of that place came with me when we left. What bothers me most, even after all these years, is that we never got answers. Why was he so angry? What was he trying to tell us? Why did he show himself to us that night in the window? I've tried to convince myself it was all just our imaginations running wild after learning about the suicide. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know what I felt in that house. And sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I still close my bedroom door, just in case something might run past. Story 3. I still remember that Christmas camping trip like it was yesterday, even though it happened 23 years ago when I was just 8 years old. My family had this tradition of going camping with 3 other families we were close with: the Andersons, the Rileys, and the Thompsons. All of us had kids around the same age, 9 of us in total, ranging from 6 to 11. We all grew up together, and those camping trips were what we looked forward to the most each year. This particular year, 1999, we decided to try somewhere new. Someone's dad, I think it was Jake's, had heard about this gorgeous spot about 4 hours north of Sydney, deep in the bush. It was properly remote. We're talking a 40-minute drive from the nearest town down dirt roads, no phone reception, no facilities, just pure wilderness, the kind of place where you could really disconnect from everything. We arrived 3 days before Christmas. I remember being squished in our station wagon with all our gear, my little sister Emma complaining the whole way because she couldn't get comfortable with the tent poles digging into her side. The last stretch of road was so bumpy that my mum kept saying we should turn back, but Dad insisted the spot would be worth it. And it was beautiful. A small clearing surrounded by dense eucalyptus forest, with a little creek nearby where we could swim and get water, after boiling it, of course. Setting up camp took ages. 4 families meant 4 tents, plus a big tarp area we rigged up as a communal space. The adults were busy getting everything organized, so us kids were told to explore but stay within shouting distance. Jake's older brother Matt had gotten this pair of walkie-talkies for his birthday a few weeks earlier, and he'd brought them along. They were these chunky yellow Motorola things with a range of about 2 kilometers. Pretty cool for back then. Those first 2 days were amazing. We swam in the creek, caught yabbies, played spotlight at night, and roasted marshmallows. Being out there felt like we were the only people in the world. The night sky was incredible. You could see the Milky Way stretched out above us, so many stars it didn't seem real. I'd never been somewhere so quiet either. When everyone was asleep, all you could hear were the sounds of the bush, crickets, the occasional rustle of something moving through the undergrowth, and the gentle sound of the creek. Christmas Eve is when it happened. The adults were all busy preparing stuff for the next day. They'd brought little gifts for everyone and were planning a special Christmas lunch. They'd been drinking beer and wine since around lunchtime, getting increasingly rowdy around the campfire. Us kids were bored of hanging around camp and wanted an adventure. Matt suggested we take the walkie-talkies and play a game where we'd split into 2 teams. One team would go hide somewhere in the bush, not too far, we promised, and the other team would have to find them using the walkie-talkies for clues. It seemed like a great idea at the time. We split into teams: Matt, my sister Emma, Jake and Lisa on one team, me, Benny, Sophie, and the Thompson twins on the other. Matt's team took one walkie-talkie and headed off to hide while we counted to 100. Before they left, Matt showed us how to use the device. Press the button on the side to talk, release it to listen. The walkie-talkies were set to channel 6. We counted, then started walking into the bush trying to find them. Every minute or so, we'd use the walkie-talkie to ask for a clue. They'd respond with something vague like, "We can see a big gum tree," or "We're near some rocks," which wasn't super helpful since the entire bush was filled with gum trees and rocks. We were having a blast though, laughing and trying to be quiet at the same time so we could sneak up on them. We'd been searching for maybe 15 minutes when the walkie-talkie crackled to life without us pressing anything. At first there was just static, which wasn't unusual. The signal wasn't great out there. But then a voice came through that wasn't Matt's or any of the other kids. It was a man's voice, deep, calm, speaking in this slow, deliberate way that immediately felt wrong. I was holding the walkie-talkie at the time, and I remember how my hand suddenly felt sweaty against the yellow plastic. "Hello there, children," the voice said, pausing between each word like he was thinking carefully about what to say. "This is Santa Claus. I've got presents for all of you, but I seem to have lost my way to your camp. Could you help me find you? I've been walking for quite some time now." We all just froze and stared at each other. There was something about his voice that sent chills up my spine. It was too controlled, too measured. He was trying to sound friendly, but it came across as forced, like someone who doesn't normally talk to kids trying to sound kid-friendly. The way he emphasized certain words felt unnatural. Benny, who was only 6, got excited and grabbed for the walkie-talkie. "Santa!" he squealed, but Sophie, who was the oldest in our group at 11, snatched it away before he could press the talk button. She had this look on her face, part confusion, part fear, that made my stomach tighten. The walkie-talkie crackled again. "Are you there, children? I can hear you playing. I've got something special for each of you. Why don't you tell me where your camp is? Or better yet, why don't you come find me? I'm not far." I remember looking around at the bush surrounding us. Suddenly, it didn't seem so friendly anymore. The trees created shadows that could hide anything, or anyone. The sounds of birds and insects seemed to have quieted, or maybe that was just my imagination. The pleasant warmth of the summer day suddenly felt stifling. "We need to get back to camp," Sophie whispered. "Now." As if on cue, the walkie-talkie crackled again. "I think I can see some of you," the voice said, and that's when real fear hit me. "I see bright clothes through the trees. Is that you? Why don't you wave to Santa?" None of us were wearing particularly bright clothes. We all had on shorts and t-shirts, mostly in blues and greens and browns. The only person in our camping group who was wearing anything bright was Matt, who had on this neon orange t-shirt his mom had bought him so she could spot him easily in crowds. Matt's team. The other group of kids. The walkie-talkie made that static sound again, and this time it was Matt's voice that came through, sounding excited. "Hey guys, did you hear that? Santa's out here. We're going to try to find him." Sophie immediately pressed the talk button. "Matt, no, that's not Santa. Get back to camp right now. Get back to camp." Her voice cracked with panic. There was no response. Sophie tried again, but nothing happened. She looked at the walkie-talkie, then at us. "We need to run back to camp. Now." We took off running, crashing through the bush with none of the care we'd had earlier. Branches scratched my arms and face, and at one point I tripped over a root and scraped my knee badly, but I barely noticed the pain. All I could think about was getting back to the safety of the adults and making sure Matt's team did too. We burst into the clearing where our tents were set up, breathless and scared. The adults looked up from the campfire, startled by our sudden appearance and obvious distress. "There's a man," Sophie gasped, still clutching the walkie-talkie. "There's a man in the bush talking to us on this. He said he's Santa and he wants us to find him. Matt and the others are looking for him." The change in the adults was immediate and terrifying. My dad, who's normally the most laid-back person ever, leapt to his feet, his face hardening in a way I'd never seen before. Mr. Anderson grabbed the walkie-talkie from Sophie and started shouting into it for Matt to respond. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Riley both grabbed torches even though it was the middle of the day. "Which way did they go?" my dad demanded, his voice tight. We pointed and the men took off at a run. The mums gathered us remaining kids together, asking questions about what had happened, what exactly the man had said. Mrs. Anderson was crying, which scared me almost as much as the voice had. Adults weren't supposed to cry. It felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes before we heard shouting. The men returned with Matt's group, all of them looking confused and scared. Matt was crying, saying they'd been trying to find Santa to get their presents. Apparently, after Sophie's warning, they'd gotten another transmission telling them to ignore the other kids, that it was all part of the game, and Santa had special treats for them if they came alone. I'll never forget the look on Mr. Anderson's face when Matt said that. Pure rage mixed with terror. He grabbed the walkie-talkies, removed the batteries, and threw them in the campfire. The plastic melted and released this awful smell, but no one seemed to care. The rest of that day was a blur. The adults huddled together, talking in low, urgent voices. They told us we weren't allowed to leave the campsite for any reason. They took turns keeping watch, even though it was still daylight. I remember my mum holding me too tight when I asked what was going on, and her voice shaking when she told me everything was fine. That night, instead of letting us sleep in our usual arrangement, kids in one tent, parents in others, they rearranged everything so each family was together. My dad slept right by the tent entrance, and I could tell he barely slept at all. Every noise made him sit up and shine his torch out into the darkness. Christmas Day was strange. The adults tried to make it normal, but there was this tension in the air that wouldn't go away. They gave us our presents, cooked a nice lunch on the campfire, but they wouldn't let us out of their sight for even a minute. If one of us needed to go to the bathroom, a parent would stand just a few meters away watching the bush line. They kept looking over their shoulders, scanning the trees. That afternoon, they announced we'd be leaving the next morning, cutting our week-long trip short by 2 days. Nobody complained. I remember the relief on everyone's faces when we drove away from that place. The adults never really explained what happened. When we asked, they'd just say it was probably someone playing a prank or a hunter who shouldn't have been in the area, but their actions told a different story. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that my dad finally told me the truth. We were having beers one night, and somehow the conversation turned to dangerous situations. He got this distant look in his eyes and asked if I remembered that Christmas camping trip. After we found Matt and the others, he said, "While you kids were with your mums, we men went further into the bush. We found footprints, adult-sized boots, and what looked like a small campsite about 1 kilometer from ours. It had been abandoned in a hurry. There was a sleeping bag, some food wrappers, and a high-powered hunting knife stuck in a tree." He took a long drink of his beer before continuing. The worst part was, there were these small markers, bits of colored ribbon tied to branches, creating a path from the spot where Matt's group had been all the way back to that campsite, like breadcrumbs for the kids to follow. I have my own kids now, a 4-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. We go camping sometimes, but never anywhere truly remote, and I never let them out of my sight. Sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I still hear that voice, slow, deliberate, calculated. "Hello there, children. This is Santa Claus." I think about how close we came that day, how easily it could have gone differently if Sophie hadn't sensed something wrong, if we hadn't run back to camp right away, if Matt's team had gotten just a little further into the bush following those ribbons. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted with us. I don't want to know. But the thought that still keeps me up at night sometimes is how he found us in the first place, out there in the middle of nowhere, and whether he's still out there somewhere, using a different voice to lure different children. Story 4. I've never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I mean, I've watched those paranormal shows on TV like everyone else, but I always thought they were just entertainment. That changed last summer when my partner Andre, our 2-year-old son Marco, and I stayed at this old farmhouse outside of Bucharest for a weekend getaway with some friends. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect from a rural Romanian farmhouse. Weathered wooden beams, slightly uneven floors that creaked with every step, and that distinct smell that old houses have, like aged wood and something else I can't quite describe. As soon as we arrived, something felt different, not threatening, just like the house was somehow more alive than it should be. I remember walking into our assigned bedroom and feeling like someone had just left the room seconds before I entered. The air seemed to shift around me. I brushed it off as just being tired from the 3-hour drive with a fussy toddler. We spent the first day exploring the property and catching up with our friends. Marco was having the time of his life, running around the yard and chasing the neighbor's cat. Everything was normal, except for these moments when I'd turn around quickly, thinking someone was behind me, only to find empty space. On our second night, everyone except Marco and I decided to go out for dinner at this restaurant about 20 minutes away. I was exhausted and offered to stay back with Marco, who needed to stick to his bedtime routine anyway. Andre was hesitant to leave us alone. Not because he was worried about our safety, but because he thought I'd be bored by myself. "Are you sure you don't want to come? We can bring Marco," he suggested, but I insisted we stay. "He'll be cranky tomorrow if we mess up his sleep schedule." "You guys go ahead, I have my book," I said, waving my dog-eared copy of some thriller I'd been trying to finish for weeks. After getting Marco settled in his porta-cot in our room, I went downstairs to the living room with the baby monitor. The house was completely silent except for the occasional groan of the old structure settling. I curled up on the sofa with my book, feeling oddly comfortable despite being alone in a strange house. I must have read for about an hour when I heard Marco sneeze through the monitor. It was that cute little baby sneeze that always made me smile. But what happened next made my blood freeze. A voice, clear as day, said, "Bless you," through the monitor. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't Andre's voice. It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle, but definitely not mine, and it spoke in English. This is what makes absolutely no sense. Marco only knows Italian from my side of the family and Romanian from Andre's. We don't speak English at home, and Marco had never been exposed to it except maybe hearing it on TV occasionally. I sat there for a solid minute, completely frozen. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe the monitor picked up a neighbor's voice or a radio signal, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The voice was too clear, too close to Marco. Finally, I got up and practically ran upstairs to check on him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pushed open the bedroom door slowly, afraid of what I might find. Marco was sleeping peacefully, his little chest rising and falling with each breath. There was nobody else in the room. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the windows, all closed. I looked under the bed, in the closet, everywhere someone could possibly hide. Nothing. I stood next to his porta-cot for several minutes, just watching him sleep and trying to calm myself down. The room felt different though, not threatening, but like the air was somehow thicker. I don't know how else to describe it. I grabbed my book and decided to stay in the room with Marco. I couldn't bring myself to go back downstairs. Every few minutes, I'd look up from my reading to scan the room, feeling like someone was watching us. Around 10 o'clock, I heard our friend's car pulling up the gravel driveway. The relief I felt was overwhelming. When Andre walked in, I nearly ran to him but stopped myself. I didn't want to seem crazy or scare him. Instead, I decided not to mention what happened. Maybe I had imagined it, or maybe there was a logical explanation I wasn't seeing. We all went to bed around midnight. I had trouble falling asleep, still thinking about that voice. Andre noticed I was restless, but I blamed it on too much coffee. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to Andre shaking my shoulder. His face was pale, and he looked genuinely frightened. "Elena, did you put those there?" he whispered, pointing toward Marco's porta-cot. I sat up, and what I saw made absolutely no sense. Marco's porta-cot was filled with books, not just one or two, but at least 20 books of various sizes. Some were open, pages facing up, others were closed and stacked. And there was Marco, still sleeping peacefully among them, his tiny hand resting on a colorful hardcover. My first thought was that Andre was playing a prank, but one look at his face told me he was just as confused as I was. We both got out of bed and approached the porta-cot cautiously. "Marco couldn't have done this," Andre whispered. "These books are too heavy for him." He was right. The books were from a shelf on the opposite wall, about 2 meters away from the porta-cot. The shelf was too high for Marco to reach, even if he had somehow climbed out of his cot, which he couldn't do yet, and the porta-cot barriers were too high for him to reach over and grab books from anywhere. What's more, there were no books on the floor. If a 2-year-old had somehow managed to get all these books, there would be evidence. Books dropped on the floor, noise that would have woken us up. But there was nothing, just neatly arranged books in the cot with our son. "Did you hear anything last night?" Andre asked, his voice still low. I shook my head, which was true. After falling asleep, I hadn't heard a thing. We stood there trying to make sense of it when Marco started to wake up. He seemed completely unbothered by the books surrounding him. He smiled at us and said, "Mama, Papa," in his sleepy voice, like nothing unusual was happening. Andre carefully removed the books while I picked up Marco. We didn't talk about it right away. We went through the motions of our morning routine, changing Marco, getting breakfast ready, packing our things since we were supposed to leave that day. It wasn't until we were loading the car that Andre finally said, "I'm glad we're leaving. This place gives me the creeps." I nodded, but the truth was I didn't feel afraid anymore. Yes, what happened was unexplainable and should have terrified me, but something about it felt benevolent, like whatever presence was in that house wasn't trying to harm us. "Did you notice anything strange while I was at dinner?" Andre asked as he put Marco's bag in the trunk. That's when I told him about the voice on the monitor. His face went pale again. "Why didn't you tell me last night?" he demanded. "Because I thought you'd think I was crazy," I admitted, and I wasn't sure what I heard. Andre shook his head. "We're never staying here again." Our friends came out of the house then, and we didn't get to finish our conversation. They hadn't experienced anything unusual during our stay, and probably would have thought we were making things up if we'd told them. As we drove away, I looked back at the farmhouse. It looked so normal in the morning light, just an old, slightly worn building with too many windows. But I knew something was there, something that had said "bless you" to my sneezing son, and apparently decided he needed bedtime stories. It's been 8 months since that weekend, and I still think about it often. I've researched the farmhouse but found nothing about it being haunted or having a tragic history. Our friends have stayed there twice since without experiencing anything unusual. I don't know what happened that night. Logic tells me there must be some explanation, but I can't find one that makes sense. All I know is that whatever or whoever was in that house seemed to care about my son. They were polite enough to say "bless you" when he sneezed and kind enough to give him books to look at. Sometimes I wonder if I should be afraid, but honestly, I'm more amazed than scared. I've tried to explain it to myself 1,000 times and still can't. Whatever happened in that farmhouse has changed how I see the world. Some things just can't be explained, and maybe that's okay. Story 5. Ivy never told anyone outside our friend group about what happened at Lakeside Manor last year. I'm still struggling to make sense of it, and part of me is afraid people will think I'm crazy or making it up. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Last summer, 6 of us rented this beautiful lake house for a weekend getaway. Me, Marcus, my brother David, my friends Tyler and Alex, and 2 girls, Lily and Rachel. The place was gorgeous. 3 bedrooms, a huge deck overlooking the water, and completely surrounded by dense forest. It was advertised as secluded luxury, and they weren't kidding about the secluded part. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away, and the town was a good 20-minute drive. Friday was perfect. We swam, grilled, drank, played music, just your typical fun getaway. The property manager had left us alone after check-in, telling us to call if we needed anything, but otherwise enjoy the privacy. Looking back, that phrase makes my skin crawl. Saturday started off great too. We spent most of the day on the lake, and by evening, we were all pretty worn out. Tyler and Alex were upstairs playing video games on the TV they'd brought. My brother David was on the upper deck with Rachel, having some drinks and talking. Lily and I decided to sit at this wooden picnic table near the edge of the property where the lawn met the forest. It was maybe 30 yards behind the house, with a good view of the sunset filtering through the trees. We'd been sitting there for maybe 15 minutes, just chatting and enjoying the evening, when I felt it. At first, I couldn't even identify what it was, just this sudden weight in the air, like when you're about to get bad news, and somehow your body knows before your brain does. I remember stopping mid-sentence and looking at Lily. She felt it too. I could tell by how her face changed. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. I nodded, not wanting to speak louder than necessary. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just dead silence. Then it started. The chanting began so suddenly it made us both jump. It was loud, thunderous even, and perfectly synchronized. Multiple male voices, all chanting in unison in some language I couldn't recognize. It wasn't Latin or anything I'd ever heard before. The rhythm was perfect, almost mechanical in its precision. The voices sounded like they were coming from deep in the forest, but they were loud enough that it felt like they were standing right behind us. Lily grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. "What the fuck is that?" she hissed. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was frozen for a moment, just listening. The chanting had this weird quality to it, each syllable perfectly enunciated, each pause exactly the same length. It wasn't natural. Human voices don't synchronize that perfectly without years of practice. We both stood up at the same time, and without saying a word, we ran back to the house. I remember looking over my shoulder as we ran, half expecting to see something emerging from the tree line, but there was nothing, just the darkening woods and that horrible chanting. We burst into the house, locking the door behind us. "David," I shouted up the stairs. "Guys, get down here." They must have heard the panic in my voice because they all came running down. David and Rachel from the deck, Tyler and Alex from the game room. "What's wrong?" David asked, looking between me and Lily. "Listen," I said, and we all went quiet. The chanting was still going, but now it sounded like it was coming from a different direction, like whatever was making the noise had moved. "What the hell is that?" Tyler asked, his face pale. "I don't know," I said. But it started suddenly while we were sitting outside. It's like a group of men chanting. We moved to the deck on the second floor, which gave us a better view of the surrounding forest. The sun was almost completely down now, casting long shadows through the trees. The chanting continued, sometimes sounding distant, then unnervingly close, like whatever was making it was circling the property. "Maybe it's just some guys camping," Alex suggested, but his voice was shaky. He didn't believe it himself. "No way," Lily said. "You don't understand how it started. It was like someone flipped a switch, all at once, perfectly in sync. That's not a bunch of campers." As we stood there trying to make sense of it, the chanting suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. We waited, straining to hear anything, when a new sound cut through the night. A loud metallic bang, like someone hitting a massive piece of metal with tremendous force. It echoed through the trees, then came the scream. God, I still hear that scream in my nightmares. It was a man's voice, but distorted with the most intense pain I've ever heard. It wasn't a scream of fear or surprise. It was agony, pure, unbridled agony. The kind of sound a human being should never make. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, and then silence again, complete and absolute silence. Rachel started crying. Tyler was cursing under his breath. David had his arm around Rachel, but I could see his hand shaking. "We need to call the police," Lily said, already pulling out her phone. "And tell them what?" Alex argued. "That we heard weird chanting and a scream in the middle of hundreds of acres of forest. What are they going to do?" "Someone could be hurt out there," Rachel said between sobs. I felt torn. Part of me knew we should report it, but another part, the primal, fearful part, just wanted to lock all the doors and wait until morning. "I'll call," I decided, taking out my phone. But of course, no signal. The rental listing had mentioned spotty cell service, but I'd had one bar earlier in the day. Now, nothing. "Landline," David suggested. "I didn't see one," Tyler said. "This place is pretty modern. I don't think they have one." We debated what to do. Alex and Tyler wanted to just lock up and ignore it. Rachel was still crying, saying we needed to help whoever was out there. Lily suggested we drive into town and call from there. "I'm not going out there," Tyler said firmly. "Not with whatever that was." "We can't just do nothing," Lily argued. As they argued, I walked to the edge of the deck and looked out into the darkness. The forest was pitch black now. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched, that whatever had been chanting knew we were here, was watching us panic. We'll wait until morning, I finally decided. We don't know where it came from. It could be miles away. We have no way to find it in the dark. If we still can't get a signal in the morning, we'll drive to town and report it. No one was happy with that plan, but no one had a better one either. We spent the night huddled in the living room, all lights on, taking turns staying awake. I don't think any of us really slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made us jump. But the chanting never returned, neither did the scream. When dawn finally broke, we packed our stuff in record time. No one wanted to stay a minute longer than necessary. As we loaded the cars, I kept looking at the forest edge, half expecting to see someone or something watching us, but there was nothing. On the drive back, we finally got cell service about 15 minutes from the lake house. We pulled over, and I called the local police. I tried to explain what we'd heard, but even as I was saying it, I could hear how crazy it sounded. The officer took the information politely enough, but didn't seem particularly concerned. Probably just some campers messing around, he suggested. We get calls like this sometimes. People hear strange noises in the woods and get spooked. This wasn't just strange noises, I insisted. The chanting was wrong, and that scream... I'll make a note of it, he interrupted. We'll send someone to check the area. I knew they wouldn't, or if they did, they wouldn't find anything. The forest was too vast, and we couldn't even say for sure which direction the sounds had come from. We talked about it constantly on the drive home, trying to rationalize what we'd heard. Tyler suggested maybe it was some kind of hunting club or outdoorsman group doing some weird ritual. Alex thought it might have been sounds carrying from much further away, maybe even from across the lake, distorted by the water and trees. Rachel was convinced someone had been hurt or killed. David was the only one who suggested what I'd been thinking, but was afraid to say out loud that we'd heard some kind of cult ritual, the synchronized chanting, the strange language, the metallic bang followed by that awful scream. It felt ritualistic, planned, deliberate. It's been over a year now, and I still think about that night all the time. I've researched the area, looking for any history of cults or strange disappearances, but found nothing concrete. I did find a few forum posts from other people who've stayed at cabins in that region mentioning strange noises or feeling watched, but nothing as specific as what we experienced. Sometimes I wonder if we should have done more, if we should have tried to find whatever made those sounds, or insisted the police investigate thoroughly. But then I remember the feeling that came over me as I sat at that picnic table, that heavy, oppressive sense of wrongness that descended just before the chanting began. And I know deep down that we were never meant to understand what happened in those woods, that we glimpsed something we weren't supposed to see. I haven't been back to any remote cabin since then. I probably never will. Some nights, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear that chanting, perfectly synchronized, inhumanly precise, just at the edge of my hearing, and I know that whatever was in those woods that night, whatever caused that man to scream in such agony, is still out there, waiting. Story 6. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been 4 years since I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and I still have nightmares about what happened out there. Some nights I wake up drenched in sweat, feeling like someone's watching me from the corner of my bedroom. I'd been planning my through hike for years. I'd saved up, quit my job, and prepared for months. The AT had always been my dream, 2,100 miles of wilderness from Georgia to Maine. I knew it would be challenging, but I never expected it would leave me afraid of the woods. I started at Springer Mountain in early April. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped for. Beautiful scenery, friendly fellow hikers, and that incredible feeling of freedom that comes with carrying everything you need on your back. I settled into the rhythm of trail life. Wake up, pack up, hike, eat, sleep, repeat. I'd never been happier. It was somewhere in North Carolina, about 3 weeks in, when I first noticed him. A tall, skinny guy with clothes that hung off him like they belonged to someone else. His backpack was ancient, faded green canvas with stains and patches everywhere. I remember thinking he looked out of place, like someone who'd stepped out of the 70s and onto the trail. That first time, he just passed me on the trail with a brief nod. Nothing unusual about that. Hikers pass each other all the time, but something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they didn't seem to blink enough. I didn't think much about him until the next day when I noticed him again. He was always behind me, keeping the same distance. When I stopped for breaks, he would eventually catch up, pass me without saying a word, and then somehow end up behind me again later. It was weird, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe we just happened to have similar hiking paces. But after 4 days of this pattern, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was at a shelter one evening, chatting with other hikers, when I mentioned the strange guy. No one else seemed to have noticed him, which I found odd since the trail community is pretty tight. People know each other, at least by trail names. That night I woke up around 2 in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe a noise or just that feeling of being watched. I looked out from my sleeping bag and nearly screamed. He was standing at the edge of the shelter clearing, just staring into the trees, not moving, not doing anything, just standing there in the moonlight. I froze, afraid to make a sound. After what felt like hours but was probably just minutes, he turned and walked into the forest. I barely slept after that. When morning came, I packed up quickly and left before anyone else was awake. I hiked fast that day, pushing myself harder than usual, hoping to put some distance between us. I reached the next shelter exhausted and fell asleep as soon as it got dark. The next morning, I stepped out of my tent and froze. There was a small pile of rocks, a cairn, placed directly outside my tent door. It wasn't there when I went to sleep. I looked around, but nobody was nearby. Some hikers make cairns as trail markers, but not like this. Not outside someone's tent while they're sleeping. From that point on, I changed my routine. I started camping only where other hikers were. I'd make friends during the day and stick close to them at night. I never mentioned the man again. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy or paranoid, but I was constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, jumping at every snapping twig. For almost 2 weeks I didn't see him. I started to relax, thinking maybe he'd gotten off the trail or hiked ahead. Maybe the whole thing had been in my head. Then I entered Virginia. It was early May, and the trail was getting busier with section hikers and weekend backpackers. I felt safer with more people around. But then came that section in southern Virginia, a stretch where shelters were far apart and camping spots limited. I'd been hiking with a couple from Kentucky for a few days, but they were taking a 0 day in a nearby town to rest. I decided to push on alone. Big mistake. I set up camp at a small clearing about half a mile off the main trail. It was a beautiful spot next to a stream, and I thought the sound of running water would help me sleep. I cooked dinner, hung my food bag away from bears, and crawled into my tent as the sun was setting. I must have fallen asleep quickly because I was exhausted, but something woke me in the middle of the night. At first I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I realized it was the silence. The stream that had been babbling when I fell asleep was now completely silent. No frogs, no insects, no nocturnal creatures moving through the underbrush. Nothing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. Someone was walking around my tent. I lay completely still, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps circled once, twice, then stopped right behind where my head was resting. I could hear breathing now, not heavy or threatening, just steady. Then I felt it. A hand pressing against the fabric of my tent, right next to my head, just pressing, not grabbing or tearing. But I could see the outline of fingers through the thin material. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move. The hand stayed there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute. Then the pressure disappeared. I heard the footsteps again, moving away slowly until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't move for hours. I lay there, clutching my pocket knife. Like that would have helped, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally came, I cautiously unzipped my tent and looked outside. Around my tent were footprints, large boot prints in the soft earth. They circled my tent exactly as I'd heard during the night. And there, where the hand had pressed against my tent, was a small stack of 3 rocks, balanced one on top of the other. I've never packed up camp so fast in my life. I didn't bother with breakfast or even changing clothes. I just stuffed everything into my pack and practically ran back to the main trail. I hiked 25 miles that day without stopping, fueled by pure adrenaline and fear, until I reached a small trail town. I got a room at the only motel and locked myself inside. I called my sister, sobbing, but I couldn't explain what had happened without sounding crazy. Someone's following me doesn't begin to describe the terror I felt. I stayed in town for 3 days, debating whether to quit the trail entirely. In the end, I decided to continue, but I changed my approach completely. I joined a trail family, a group of 5 other hikers, and never camped alone again. I told them I was afraid of bears, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was afraid, just not of bears. I finished the trail that September. The rest of the hike was beautiful and challenging in all the right ways, but I never fully relaxed. I was always scanning the trail behind us, always the first to suggest camping near other hikers, always volunteering for the middle spot in the tent arrangement. I never saw the man again, at least not clearly. But twice more during that hike, I woke to find small cairns outside my tent. And once, at a crowded shelter in New Hampshire, I thought I saw him standing at the edge of the woods, watching our group. By the time I grabbed my headlamp to look closer, he was gone. I've tried to make sense of it over the years. Was he dangerous? If he wanted to hurt me, he had plenty of opportunities. Was he mentally ill? Lost? Or was he just another hiker with poor social skills who didn't realize how terrifying his behavior was? I'll never know. But I do know this. I haven't gone camping since finishing the AT. I still hike, but only day hikes, and never alone. The thought of sleeping in a tent with only thin fabric between me and whatever might be out there in the dark makes my chest tight with panic. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, following some other hiker who doesn't know yet that they're being watched. I wonder if he remembers me, or if I was just one of many he's silently stalked through the wilderness. The scariest part isn't what happened. It's that I'll never know why. Why me? What did he want? Was he trying to communicate something with those rock piles, or was it just his way of letting me know I was never truly alone? I check the hiking forums sometimes, looking for stories similar to mine. I've never found any. Maybe he only followed me. Maybe he's not even real, and I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the hand against my tent, the perfect outline of fingers pressing through the fabric, and I know he was real. Whatever his reasons, he took something from me out there on the trail, my sense of safety in the wilderness. Valerie was explaining in this shaky voice about her family background. My grandmother taught my mother, and my mother taught me, she said. It's been in our family for generations. I paused what I was doing, not meaning to eavesdrop, but unable to help myself. I consulted my board every morning, she continued. What to wear, what to eat, what to buy at the store, every decision for the past 20 years. Pastor Mike asked what she meant by board, and her response sent chills down my spine. My Ouija board, she said. It's been my guide. But now I want to follow Jesus, and something doesn't want me to. Roger explained that since Valerie had decided to convert and give up her practices, strange things had been happening in their home. She'd wake up with unexplained bruises, items would move on their own, but worst of all were the shadows, dark figures that Valerie claimed watched her from corners and doorways. Pastor Mike called me over then, along with 2 other deacons, and we agreed to meet at their house the following evening. I remember being nervous about the whole thing. I'd been a Baptist my whole life and had never dealt with anything like this before. The Wilsons lived in one of those old 2-story houses on the east side of Flint, paint peeling, porch sagging, the kind of place that seemed permanently in shadow even on a sunny day. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, this heaviness in the air, like the oxygen was thicker somehow. The house smelled of old books and something else I couldn't identify, something sour and unpleasant. Everything's upstairs, Valerie said, leading us to a small room at the end of the hallway. The room made my skin crawl. Shelves lined the walls, packed with old leather-bound books. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling. In the center was a table with a black cloth, crystals, candles, and that Ouija board she'd mentioned. It looked ancient, the wood darkened with age and use. "This is everything," she said. "All the books, the tools, everything my mother left me." Pastor Mike explained we needed to remove it all, that these items were conduits for negative energy. Valerie nodded, but her hands trembled. I noticed she kept glancing at the corner of the room, though there was nothing there. We brought garbage bags and started packing everything up. Some of the books were in languages I didn't recognize, with illustrations that made my stomach turn. As I reached for one particularly old volume, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. I'm not exaggerating, I could see my breath. "Did you feel that?" I asked, but no one responded. They were all staring at Valerie. She was rigid, her eyes rolled back, mumbling words I couldn't understand. Then suddenly she snapped out of it, collapsed to her knees, and began vomiting on the floor, the same violent retching we'd witnessed at church. Roger rushed to her side while Pastor Mike began praying loudly. The other deacons joined in, and I did too, though my voice was shaking. As we prayed, the room gradually returned to normal temperature. When Valerie recovered, she looked exhausted but determined. "Take it all," she whispered. "I don't want any of it anymore." We filled 6 large garbage bags with books, candles, crystals, herbs, and other items I couldn't identify. The Ouija board went into a separate bag, which Pastor Mike took himself. We agreed to burn everything the next day at the church, where we could do it safely and with prayer. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the look on Valerie's face, the sudden cold, the heaviness in that house. I grew up hearing about spiritual warfare, but I'd never experienced it firsthand. The next day was when things got really terrifying. We gathered at the church around noon, Pastor Mike, myself, 3 other deacons, Roger, and Valerie. The plan was to pray over Valerie, then burn all the items. We set up in the main sanctuary, arranging chairs in a circle with Valerie in the center. From the moment she entered the church, Valerie was different. Her movements were jerky, her eyes darting around the room. She sat in the chair, gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. Pastor Mike started with scripture, reading passages about Christ's authority over evil spirits. Valerie began sweating profusely, her thin body shaking. When Pastor Mike approached her to lay hands on her head, she looked up at him with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't Valerie looking out from those eyes. "She belongs to us." A voice came from her mouth, deeper than her normal tone. "She has always been ours." I felt my blood run cold. One of the deacons, Bill, started backing away, but Pastor Mike signaled for us to close the circle tighter. What happened next still haunts me. As Pastor Mike commanded whatever was inside Valerie to leave in Jesus' name, she began to convulse. Foam formed at the corners of her mouth. She made these guttural, animal-like growls that didn't sound human. Then she stood up with such force that the heavy wooden chair flew backward. Bill and I tried to restrain her, but this tiny woman, remember, she couldn't have weighed more than 95 pounds, threw us off like we were nothing. Bill, who worked construction and was easily 200 pounds, was tossed halfway across the room. I was slammed against the wall so hard I saw stars. Roger was crying, begging whatever was happening to stop. Pastor Mike kept praying, louder now, while Valerie contorted her body in ways that seemed impossible. Her back arched at an unnatural angle, her face twisted in rage. "Name yourself," Pastor Mike demanded, holding his Bible out like a shield. The voice that answered named not one entity but many, names I won't repeat here. It claimed they had been with Valerie's family for generations, that they wouldn't let her go. This continued for hours, literal hours. The sun was setting by the time Valerie finally collapsed to the floor, completely still. We thought for a terrible moment that she might be dead, but then she took a deep, shuddering breath and began to sob. When she opened her eyes, they were her own again. She looked confused, exhausted, asking what had happened. She had no memory of the past several hours. We thought it was over. We were wrong. About a week later, Roger called Pastor Mike in a panic. Their 13-year-old son had begun seeing shadows in his room at night, the same kind Valerie had described. Despite our thorough cleaning of the house, something remained. We returned to their home, searching every corner. In the son's room, pushed far under the bed, we found a book we'd missed. It had a unicorn on the cover and looked innocent enough, like a children's fantasy story. But when Pastor Mike touched it, he recoiled as if burned. "This is it," he said grimly. "This is what we missed." The book, despite its innocent appearance, was filled with symbols and incantations. Valerie confirmed it had been one of the first items her mother had given her as a child, an introduction to their family tradition. We took the book outside immediately and burned it in their backyard, praying over the flames. As the pages curled and blackened, I swear I heard a faint screaming sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. That was the end of it. The shadows disappeared. Valerie stopped getting sick before church. She and Roger became active members of our congregation, and she even started teaching Sunday school the following year. I've thought about those events countless times since then. I've questioned what I saw, what I heard. Was it mass hysteria, some kind of psychological breakdown? But I can't explain how that frail woman threw grown men across a room. I can't explain the voice that wasn't hers. I can't explain the cold that descended in that upstairs room. All I know is that there are forces at work in this world that most of us never encounter. And when those forces find a conduit, a doorway through which to enter our reality, they don't leave without a fight. I still see Valerie occasionally around town. She seems happy, healthy. She never mentions what happened, and neither do I. But sometimes I catch her looking over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure nothing is following her. And honestly, sometimes I find myself doing the same thing. Story 8. I still have trouble sleeping some nights. It's been 7 years, and I keep thinking about that voice at Charles Campsall. I've never shared this story online before, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar there. I grew up in Edmonton, and like most teenagers, my friends and I were always looking for thrills. Urban exploration was our thing. Abandoned buildings, old warehouses, that sort of stuff. By the time we were 17, we'd explored most of the accessible abandoned places in the city. But there was one spot that was our favorite: the old Charles Campsall Hospital. For those who don't know, Campsall is this massive decaying tuberculosis sanatorium that closed down in 1996. The place is enormous, 5 stories of crumbling brick and broken windows sitting on this huge plot of land at the edge of the city. It's surrounded by overgrown fields and this creepy forest that seems to have reclaimed parts of the property. My friends, Layla, Marcus, Sarah, and I, Jordan, had been there 3 times before. We knew the history, or at least what we'd pieced together from internet forums and local stories. The place opened right after World War II and was originally for TB patients, but over the years, it supposedly became a site for all kinds of messed up stuff. There were stories about forced sterilizations of indigenous patients, experimental electroshock treatments, and even rumors about unauthorized vaccine testing. I don't know how much of it is true, but the building itself feels wrong, like the walls absorbed all the suffering that happened there. Anyway, it was October 2016, just a couple weeks before Halloween. We decided to make one last trip to Campsall before the snow came. We had this routine down by then: park about half a mile away in this shopping center lot, cut through a trail in the woods, and then approach from the back where there was less chance of being seen from the road. The sun was starting to set when we reached the hospital. The whole building was silhouetted against this orangey-purple sky, and I remember thinking it looked like something from a horror movie poster. We weren't worried, though. We'd been there before, and our plan was always the same: get in through this basement window that had a broken lock, explore for an hour or so with our flashlights, take some pictures, and get out. But this time was different. When we reached our usual entry point, we found fresh steel bars installed over the window. Not just some flimsy boarding, but actual thick metal bars cemented into the foundation. "Someone's been here," Marcus said, shining his flashlight along the window frame. "These aren't old." Sarah immediately got nervous. "Maybe we should just go. This feels different." I wasn't ready to give up, though. "Let's check the other side. Maybe there's another way in." We spent about 20 minutes circling the building, checking every possible entrance, but they'd secured everything. Even the door we'd found unlocked last time had a brand new padlock on it. "This sucks," Layla said, kicking at some gravel. "I wanted to get some new photos for Instagram." I was disappointed too. I'd been looking forward to this all week, but there was nothing we could do. The place was locked up tight. "Let's head back," I finally said. "It's getting dark anyway." We started walking across the field behind the hospital, heading toward the tree line where our path back to the car started. The grass was tall, almost up to our knees in some spots, and slightly damp from rain earlier in the day. I remember the squishing sound our shoes made and how the dying sunlight made everything look washed out and gray. We were about halfway across the field, maybe 100 feet from the back of the hospital when it happened. "You know you shouldn't be here." The voice came from directly behind us. It wasn't whispered or far away. It was clear as day, like someone was standing right at our backs. It was a man's voice, but sort of hollow, with this weird echo quality that didn't make sense in an open field. We all froze mid-step. I felt every hair on my body stand up at once, and this cold wave washed over me like I'd been dunked in ice water. We turned around at the same moment, all four of us spinning to face whatever was behind us. But there was nothing there, just the empty field stretching back to the hospital. "What the fuck?" Marcus whispered. Sarah grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug in through my jacket. "Tell me you guys heard that." I couldn't even respond. My throat felt like it was closing up. The field was completely empty. No places to hide, no one running away, nothing but tall grass swaying slightly in the breeze. Layla was the first to break. She just started running toward the trees without saying a word. Marcus followed immediately, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her along, but I couldn't move. It was like my feet were cemented to the ground. I stood there staring at the empty field, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. That's when it spoke again. "If I were you, I'd run too." The voice was deeper this time, more guttural, and it was closer, like someone was speaking directly into my ear. I could almost feel breath on my neck. I've never run so fast in my life. I bolted toward the trees where my friends had disappeared, not looking back once. My lungs were burning, and I kept tripping over the uneven ground. But I didn't slow down. I caught up to the others at the edge of the trees, and we all just kept running through the woods, branches whipping our faces until we reached the parking lot. We practically threw ourselves into Marcus's car. He fumbled with the keys, swearing under his breath, before finally getting the engine started. No one said a word as we peeled out of that lot. It wasn't until we were on the main road, streetlights flashing overhead, that anyone spoke. "Everyone heard that, right?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "The voice?" We all nodded. "There was nobody there," Layla said. "I looked everywhere. The field was empty." Marcus gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. Maybe it was just some homeless guy or something, someone hiding in the grass. But we all knew that was impossible. The grass wasn't tall enough to hide an adult, and we would have seen movement if someone had been running away. Besides, the voice hadn't sounded like it was coming from the grass. It sounded like it was coming from directly behind us, at head height. "I've heard stories," Sarah said quietly, "about that field behind the hospital." We all looked at her. "My cousin works for the city, in records. She told me there are rumors about unmarked graves back there. Patients who died and had no family to claim them. Some of them were indigenous people from reserves who were sent there for treatment and never came back." I felt sick. "Why didn't you mention this before?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I thought it was just a story, and we were never out in that field before. We always went straight to the building." We drove to a McDonald's and sat in the parking lot, trying to calm down. I remember how the bright fluorescent lights made everyone look pale and sick. None of us could eat. We just kept going over what happened, trying to find some logical explanation, but there wasn't one. The next day at school, we tried to act normal, but I could tell everyone was still freaked out. Marcus even suggested we go back during daylight to prove to ourselves there was nothing supernatural going on. But none of us wanted to return, not even in broad daylight. About a month later, I was doing research for a history project when I came across an old newspaper article about Charles Campbell Hospital. It mentioned that in the 1950s there had been allegations that the hospital staff had buried deceased Indigenous patients in unmarked graves to avoid the expense of transporting bodies back to remote reserves. The article said a formal investigation had been planned but was never completed. The spot where we heard the voice, it matches exactly with where those graves were supposed to be. I've never gone back to Charles Campbell. I found out last year that they finally brought in ground-penetrating radar to search for those unmarked graves. I don't know what they found. I couldn't bring myself to follow the story. Some things are better left unknown. What keeps me up at night isn't just the memory of that voice, it's the feeling I had in that moment. This bone-deep certainty that whatever spoke to us wasn't human, and the way it seemed to single me out when I didn't run away immediately. Sometimes I dream about that field. In my dreams, I turn around and see who or what was speaking, but I always wake up before I can make out a face. Maybe that's a mercy. I still live in Edmonton, but I take the long way around that part of town. I don't even like driving past the old hospital grounds. Layla moved away for college, and we've lost touch. Marcus and Sarah are still around, but we don't talk about that day. It's like we made some unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened, but it did happen. And I still don't have an explanation for what we heard in that field. All I know is that some places hold on to their past in ways we don't understand. And sometimes, if you listen closely, the past speaks back. Story 9. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I'm not looking for anyone to solve this or tell me what happened. I honestly don't think anyone can. I just need to put this somewhere because it's eating me alive, and maybe writing it all down will help me process it. I was a deputy sheriff in rural Georgia for almost 7 years. Nothing fancy, just regular patrol work, traffic stops, domestic calls, the occasional DUI, small town stuff, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. December 7th, 2003 was my last shift. I haven't been able to put on a uniform since. That night started like any other winter patrol. Cold, quiet, Sunday evening. Most folks were home getting ready for the work week. I remember it was drizzling earlier, but it had cleared up, leaving that damp, heavy feeling in the air. I was working the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., covering Highway 41 and the surrounding back roads. Around quarter to midnight, I was driving north when I spotted a blue Honda Civic on the shoulder with its hazards blinking. Nothing unusual about that. People break down all the time. I called in the stop to dispatch, pulled in behind it, and hit my light bar so nobody would rear-end me. Standard procedure. When I approached, I immediately noticed something off. The engine was still running, driver's door open about halfway, but nobody inside or around the vehicle. I called out a few times. Sheriff's Department, anyone need assistance? But got nothing back except the sound of crickets and the occasional car passing by. The car wasn't damaged. Keys in the ignition. No signs of a struggle. There was a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, still cold. A phone charger plugged in, but no phone. A folder of papers on the passenger seat with what looked like pharmaceutical sales materials. The GPS was on, showing some destination way out in the Atlantic Ocean of all places. Who programs coordinates into the middle of the ocean? I ran the plates and found out the car belonged to a Brandon Keller. Dispatch told me he'd been reported missing 3 days earlier. That changed things from a routine stop to a potential crime scene. I was careful not to touch anything else inside the vehicle and decided to check the immediate area. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking the perimeter, checking the ditches on both sides of the highway first. Nothing. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing that suggested someone had been pulled from their vehicle. The grass wasn't even bent down in most places. About 50 feet ahead of the car, I noticed something reflecting my flashlight beam just inside the tree line. I can't even tell you what it was, just a quick flash of something metallic or reflective. Given the circumstances, I decided to check it out. I remember the exact moment I stepped off the asphalt and onto the dirt shoulder. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like the pressure had changed. My ears didn't pop or anything. It was just this subtle shift that made me pause for a second. But I shrugged it off and kept going. As I approached the trees, I called dispatch again to update my position. I told them I was checking something in the woods and would radio back in 5. They acknowledged, and I remember hearing static on the radio that wasn't there before, just a brief burst of it. The tree line was maybe 30 yards from the highway, not deep woods, just a typical Georgia mix of pine and oak. As I got closer, I swept my flashlight across the ground and trees, looking for that reflection I'd seen. Nothing jumped out at me. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps deeper in the woods, that distinct sound of someone walking on dry leaves. I called out again, identifying myself as a sheriff's deputy and asking if anyone needed help. The footsteps stopped immediately. I listened for a good 30 seconds, hearing nothing but my own breathing and distant highway noise. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The crickets had stopped. Even the occasional car noise from the highway seemed muffled, like someone had turned down the volume. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that when the woods go silent, something's wrong. I should have gone back to my cruiser and called for backup. That's protocol, and I knew better. But I was thinking about this Brandon Keller guy, missing for 3 days, and how this might be my only chance to find him. So I pressed on, just a little further into the trees. The woods weren't thick, but my flashlight beam seemed to be getting... I don't know how to describe it except to say it was getting absorbed somehow. The light didn't reach as far as it should have. Objects that should have been illuminated remained shadowy, even when I was shining the light directly at them. About 15 yards into the trees, I found a small clearing, and that's where things started getting truly strange. The clearing was perfectly circular, maybe 20 feet across, with no stumps or signs that trees had been cut down. It was as if nothing had ever grown there. The ground in the clearing felt different underfoot, harder, almost smooth in places. I knelt down to examine it and realized there was no undergrowth at all. No weeds, no moss, nothing. Just bare dirt that felt strangely warm to the touch despite the cold December air. As I stood up, I noticed my flashlight was dimming. I figured the batteries were dying, though I'd changed them at the start of my shift. I tapped it a few times, and it brightened momentarily before starting to fade again. I decided I'd gone far enough alone and turned to head back to my cruiser. That's when I saw movement at the edge of the clearing opposite from where I'd entered. My flashlight caught just a glimpse of someone, moving between the trees. "Hello? This is Deputy Forrester with the Sheriff's Department. I need you to come out where I can see you," I called out, trying to keep my voice authoritative while reaching for my radio with my free hand. I keyed the mic and started to report what I was seeing, but the radio just gave me static. I tried again and managed to get out. "Dispatch, this is Forrester. I'm in the woods near mile marker 63. There's someone walking back from the trees. They don't..." And that's when I saw it clearly. I remember my exact words. "Wait, that's not possible." Because what I was looking at shouldn't have been possible. The figure stepping into the clearing wasn't walking normally. It moved with a strange, fluid motion that didn't match how a human body should move, and as my failing flashlight beam passed over it, I realized it wasn't casting a shadow, not even a hint of one. I couldn't make out facial features, just a dark silhouette roughly the shape of a person. But as it moved closer, I realized it was all wrong. The proportions were off, arms too long, neck too thin, and it wasn't just one figure anymore. There were others emerging from the trees all around the clearing. My flashlight was nearly dead now, giving just enough light to see the shapes, but not the details. Part of me is grateful for that. The little I could see was disturbing enough. I backed away, stumbling slightly, and that's when my flashlight died completely. The darkness that fell wasn't normal darkness. It was absolute, the kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. No ambient light from the moon, stars, or distant highway penetrated it. In that darkness, I felt something brush against my arm, not a tree branch or leaves. It felt like fingers, but cold and dry, like touching old leather. I jerked away and started running in what I hoped was the direction of the highway. I don't remember much of that run, just crashing through branches, tripping over roots, completely disoriented. My breath came in gasps, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The only thought in my head was getting back to my cruiser. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear the highway anymore. I should have reached it already, but there was nothing. No traffic sounds, no light from passing cars, nothing to orient myself. I stopped, trying to control my breathing enough to listen for any directional cues. That's when I heard what sounded like my name being called from somewhere in the darkness. Not shouted, just spoken in a conversational tone, as if the speaker was right next to me. But the voice wasn't coming from any particular direction. It seemed to surround me. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It didn't even sound entirely human. It had this strange resonance to it, like multiple people speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. I started running again, no longer caring about direction, just needing to get away from that voice. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally had to stop, hunched over and gasping for air, I realized I could see again. Not well. It was still night after all, but normal night vision had returned. I was in a part of the woods I didn't recognize, with no sign of the clearing, the figures, or the highway. I checked my watch. It was just after 3 a.m. Somehow, over 3 hours had passed since I'd approached that car. 3 hours I couldn't account for. I spent the rest of the night trying to find my way out of those woods. Around dawn, I stumbled onto a dirt road that eventually led me to a gas station, about 5 miles from where I'd left my cruiser. The attendant called it in, and within minutes, half the department was there, along with my sergeant. The official search for me had started just after midnight, when I failed to respond to dispatch's check-ins. They'd found both vehicles, my cruiser and the Honda, exactly where I'd left them, but no sign of me or my flashlight. I told them everything I could remember, but I could see the skepticism in their faces. They found no clearing in the woods, no evidence of anyone or anything unusual. My sergeant suggested I was suffering from exhaustion or had hit my head when I fell in the dark. The investigation into Brandon Keller's disappearance continued, but they never found him, or the other people who went missing along that same stretch of Highway 41 over the years. I didn't know about those cases until later, when I started doing my own research. I resigned from the department the following week. Couldn't bring myself to drive that highway again, let alone patrol it at night. Some of my former colleagues think I had some kind of breakdown. Others avoid the subject entirely when I see them around town. It's been years now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights, hearing that voice saying my name in the darkness. I've moved twice, hoping to outrun the nightmares, but they always find me. The strangest part, every December 7th, my digital devices go haywire. Clocks reset, phones lose signal, computers crash, like something's interfering with the electronics around me. Just for that one day. I don't expect anyone to believe this. I'm not sure I would if someone told me the same story, but it happened. And whatever's out there on that stretch of Highway 41 is still there, waiting for the next person to step off the asphalt and into those woods. Acadio. Story 10. I still remember everything about that house like it was yesterday, even though it's been 15 years. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, thinking I'm back there. I was only 6 when we moved to House 404 in Willowbrook. It was supposed to be our fresh start, you know. Mom had just married my stepdad, and we were trying to be a real family with my older brother. The day we first saw the house, something felt off. I can't explain it exactly, just this weird heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe. The realtor seemed nervous the whole time, rushing us through rooms and avoiding the upstairs bedrooms until the very end. Before we left, She pulled my stepdad aside and said something that seemed strange at the time. "The roses taped to the walls, don't remove them." The previous owners were very specific about that. There were these dried roses taped at random spots throughout the house. Not many, maybe 7 or 8 total. Most were in the upstairs hallway and my brother's bedroom. They looked old and brittle, but someone had carefully secured them with clear tape. My stepdad just nodded, but I remember how he rolled his eyes when she walked away. We moved in the following weekend. The first thing my stepdad did was rip down those roses, muttering about superstitious nonsense and how they were collecting dust. Mom didn't say anything, but I remember how she flinched each time he tore one off the wall. The weird stuff started almost immediately. I got home from school early one day during our first week, around 2 in the afternoon. Mom was at work, my stepdad was on a business trip, and my brother had basketball practice. I was alone, but I wasn't scared. Not yet. I was watching TV in the living room when I first felt it, like someone was watching me. I turned around, but nobody was there. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the floor of my brother's bedroom upstairs. I froze, remote control clutched in my sweaty hand, listening to those footsteps pace back and forth, back and forth. I called my mom, voice shaking. She said it was probably just the house settling or the pipes. She told me to lock the doors and she'd be home in an hour. That was the longest hour of my life. My aunt and uncle stayed in our basement for a few weeks while they were between apartments. They moved out after just 10 days. My uncle told my stepdad they kept hearing footsteps upstairs when everyone was gone. My aunt said she woke up one night and saw a woman standing at the foot of their bed, just staring. When she screamed, the figure vanished. Our dog Bear, this massive German shepherd who wasn't afraid of anything, refused to go upstairs. He'd stand at the bottom of the stairs, hackles raised, growling at nothing. Sometimes he'd bark frantically at my brother's bedroom door, even when no one was inside. Most nights, Bear slept right outside my bedroom door like he was standing guard. About a month after we moved in, my brother had some friends over. They were playing hide and seek, and one of the boys, Kyle, I think his name was, decided to hide in my brother's closet. When they found him, he was pale and shaking. He refused to go back upstairs and called his mom to pick him up early. Later, my brother told me what Kyle had said. He was hiding in the closet when he heard someone enter the room. He assumed it was my brother looking for him, but the footsteps were too light. Through the slats in the closet door, he saw footprints appearing in the carpet, like someone was walking across the room, but there was no one there. Then he felt someone breathing on his neck, and a woman's voice whispered in his ear, "This is my house. Get out." After that, none of my brother's friends would come over anymore. My brother started sleeping on the couch downstairs. He said his room was always freezing cold, no matter how high we turned up the heat. I tried to tell my mom and stepdad about the weird stuff, but they didn't believe me. My stepdad said I was just seeking attention because of the new family situation. Mom seemed worried but didn't want to upset him. Looking back, I think she knew something was wrong but was too scared to admit it. One day, my brother and I were playing in the backyard when we discovered this small concrete wall behind some overgrown bushes. There was writing on it in what looked like red paint. It said, "These roses shall not be removed. They keep her spirit at bay. I say goodbye, for I'll kill myself today." We ran inside to tell my stepdad, but when he came out to look, the writing was gone. He grounded us both for making up stories. But the scariest thing, the thing that finally convinced my parents, happened about 3 months after we moved in. My stepdad's cousin was staying over in the guest room across from mine. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling cold. My blanket was gone. I reached down to grab it from the floor, thinking I'd kicked it off, but it wasn't there. Then I saw it. My blanket was floating in the air at the foot of my bed, just hovering there, like someone invisible was holding it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The blanket slowly lowered to the floor, then suddenly shot back up and hovered again. This happened 3 times before it was violently yanked to the floor. That's when I found my voice and screamed. Seconds later, I felt hands grab my ankles and pull. I was dragged completely off my bed and thrown, literally thrown, across the room. My back hit the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. My stepdad's cousin burst into the room and saw me being lifted off the ground by nothing. He said later that I was suspended about 2 feet in the air, my nightgown rippling like someone was gripping the front of it, before being dropped roughly to the floor. We moved out the next day, just packed what we could carry and went to a hotel. My stepdad went back with some friends to get the rest of our stuff, but I never set foot in that house again. Years later, when I was in high school, I did some research on the house. What I found made my blood run cold. About 20 years before we moved in, a newly married couple lived there. The husband murdered his pregnant wife just days after their wedding, then hanged himself in what had been my brother's bedroom. According to the newspaper articles, the wife's body was found sealed in a crawl space in the closet of that same room, right where Kyle had been hiding. The roses, they were from their wedding. The husband had taped them around the house as some sort of memorial before killing himself. The police report mentioned a note found near his body that rambled about how the roses would keep her spirit at bay and protect the living from her wrath. By removing those roses, my stepdad had unleashed whatever was trapped there, and for some reason, it seemed particularly angry with me. Maybe because I was a child living in the house where her child should have been. We never talked about House 404 as a family after we moved. My stepdad refused to acknowledge what happened, and Mom just wanted to forget. My brother had nightmares for years. As for me, I still can't sleep with my feet uncovered, afraid of those invisible hands grabbing my ankles in the dark. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has moved into that house, if they've experienced the same things we did. Part of me wants to warn them, but a bigger part never wants to see that place again. I drive a different route just to avoid going down that street. I've tried to rationalize what happened, to find some logical explanation. But how do you explain being thrown across a room by nothing? How do you explain footprints appearing in carpet with no one there? Some things just can't be explained away. Last year, I drove past Willowbrook on my way to visit a college friend. I found myself turning down that street, almost against my will. House 404 was still there, but it looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, yard overgrown. Maybe that's for the best. Some houses should just be left empty. I sometimes wonder about her, the woman who died there. Was she angry because of what happened to her? Was she trying to hurt me or warn me? I'll never know. But I do know this. Whatever was in that house wasn't just my imagination. It was real, and it's probably still there, waiting for the next family to move in and make the same mistake we did. I still have nightmares where I'm back in that house, alone, hearing those footsteps coming down the hall toward my room. In my dreams, I can never scream, never move. I just lie there, waiting for whatever's coming. Then I wake up, heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. Sometimes, on particularly bad nights, I swear I can hear a woman whispering in the dark corners of my room, "This is my house, get out." Story 11. I still haven't been sleeping well since I got back from what was supposed to be my perfect working retreat last month. I keep waking up at 3 in the morning, listening for those footsteps that I know aren't there, but my mind won't let it go. It started simply enough. I'd been burning out at work, software development for a fintech startup in San Francisco, and my therapist suggested I take some time completely off-grid. My boss surprisingly agreed, saying I could take 3 weeks if I promised to come back with our new payment processing interface fully mapped out. I found this listing online for a cabin near the Oregon-California border, deep in the mountains where there was no cell service, no internet, and barely any people. Perfect. I should have been suspicious when the rental was so cheap, but the listing was honest. Rustic accommodations, no electricity, propane stove, wood heat, hand pump for water. The owner, a guy named Terry, met me in the nearest town, if you could call it that, just a general store, a tiny library, and a diner, to give me the keys and a hand-drawn map. "The GPS won't help you past this point," he said, pointing to a spot on the paper. "The roads ain't really roads up there." He wasn't kidding. The last 5 miles to the cabin were on dirt tracks that had my Subaru bottoming out constantly. I arrived just before sunset, the golden light making the little cabin look like something from a magazine. One room with a loft sleeping area, a small kitchen, living space with a wood stove, and a bathroom with an honest-to-God claw foot tub. Outside was a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs facing the tree line. Behind the cabin, maybe 50 yards back, I could hear the burble of a creek through the trees. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I'd wake with the sun, make coffee on the propane stove, and spend mornings working on my laptop until the battery ran low. Afternoons, I'd explore the woods, read books, or just sit on the porch watching birds. Evenings, I'd recharge my devices using the car, cook dinner, and write in my journal by lantern light. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no notifications, no neighbors, just wind in the pines and occasional animal sounds. On the 4th day, the temperature dropped and it rained all morning. By late afternoon, the sun came out, so I decided to finally check out the creek I'd been hearing. I followed a faint path from behind my cabin through dense woods for about 3 minutes before reaching a small clearing where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Beautiful spot with moss-covered rocks and clear water rushing over smooth stones. That's when I noticed another structure partially visible through the trees on the far bank. Curious, I rock-hopped across the creek and pushed through some undergrowth to find another cabin, obviously much older than mine and in serious disrepair. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and blackberry vines had grown up around and through it. The door hung crooked on one hinge. I probably should have just left it alone, but I've always been too curious for my own good. I carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Musty, moldy, with that unmistakable staleness of a place long abandoned. Furniture was still there, a couch with stuffing spilling out, a broken kitchen table, chairs tipped over. But what really caught my attention were the photographs still hanging on the walls. They were family photos, faded and water-damaged, but still clear enough to make out. A woman with long dark hair and a wide smile. 2 teenage boys with the same smile, clearly brothers or at least close relatives. And a younger girl, maybe 8 or 9, with pigtails and missing front teeth. The photos looked like they were from the 90s, the clothing styles, the film quality. One photo near what must have been the kitchen was partially burned, like someone had tried to set it on fire but stopped halfway. Something about those photos made me deeply uncomfortable. Not just because they'd been abandoned, but because they felt interrupted. Like one day this family was living their normal life, and then suddenly they weren't. I took a few pictures with my phone to show Terry when I returned the keys. Maybe he knew what happened. I left quickly after that, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. That night, for the first time, the isolation of my cabin felt less peaceful and more ominous. The dark outside the windows seemed deeper, and I kept hearing what I thought were footsteps on the porch, though when I checked with my flashlight, nothing was there. The next morning, I decided to drive into town for supplies and to ask about the abandoned cabin. The library seemed like the best place for local information, so I stopped there first. The librarian was an older woman named Margaret, who seemed delighted to have someone to talk to. When I mentioned I was staying in one of the cabins up in the mountains and had found an abandoned one nearby, her friendly expression immediately changed. "You're not staying in the Davidson cabin, are you?" she asked, her voice tight. I checked my rental agreement. "No, my paperwork says Pine Creek Cabin, owned by Terry Larson." She visibly relaxed. "Oh, that's good. That's about a quarter-mile from the Redmond place. That's probably what you found." I showed her the photos I'd taken of the family pictures. Her face paled. "Those are the Redmonds," she said quietly. "Carla and her kids. Terrible business, that was." She pulled out a folder from beneath the counter labeled Local History and flipped through it until she found what she was looking for. A newspaper clipping from 2002. The headline made my blood run cold. "Mother and 2 boys murdered in mountain cabin, girl missing." Margaret gave me the terrible details. Carla Redman, 42, her son James, 16, and his friend Brandon, 15, had been brutally murdered in that cabin. Carla had been tied to a chair and tortured. The boys had been beaten to death. Her daughter Leah, 9, had disappeared. Her remains were found 5 years later, about a quarter mile from the cabin. The strange thing, Margaret said, lowering her voice although we were alone in the library, was that nobody heard anything. There are other cabins in that area, not close, but sound carries in those mountains. But not a single person reported hearing screams or anything unusual that night. The case had gone cold. No suspects, no motive. The cabins in that area had been nearly impossible to rent out afterward, which explained why mine was so affordable. Did they ever find who did it? I asked, my mouth dry. Not for years, Margaret said, finding another, more recent article. About 3 years ago, some hikers found a metal canister buried behind the Redman cabin. It had photographs inside, lots of them. Some were normal family photos, like the ones you saw, but others, she shuddered. Others were taken through windows at night, of the family inside, not knowing they were being watched. The evidence had led investigators to a maintenance worker who had occasionally done jobs at cabins in the area. He had apparently stalked the family for over a year, learning their routines, watching them. He waited for a night when the power was out in the area due to a storm, knowing they'd be even more isolated than usual. He died years ago in a car accident, Margaret said. But they found journals in his home. He wrote that he did it to see what people looked like when they lost hope. Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt sick. I thanked Margaret for the information and left, my mind reeling. As I drove back to the cabin, every shadow in the woods seemed menacing. The isolation that had felt so peaceful now felt dangerous. I kept thinking about those photos on the wall, that family whose lives had been so brutally ended in a place where no one could hear them scream. Back at my cabin, I tried to focus on work, but couldn't. I kept looking out the windows, starting at every sound. As dusk fell, I built up the fire in the wood stove and double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. The killer was long dead, and the crimes had happened years ago. Around midnight, I finally went to bed, exhausted but still on edge. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke with a start at what my watch said was 3:15 in the morning. Something had pulled me from sleep, a sound. I lay perfectly still, listening. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch outside. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the porch to the other and then stopping right outside my bedroom window. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the footsteps moved away, down the steps, and then, most terrifying of all, not back toward the road, but toward the trees, toward the Redman cabin. I didn't sleep again that night. As soon as the first gray light of dawn appeared, I threw my belongings into my bags and packed the car. I was leaving, work, retreat be damned. Just before pulling away, something made me walk around the cabin to check the porch where I'd heard the footsteps. There, clearly visible in the soft dirt, was a line of boot prints, large ones, much bigger than my feet. They led from the trees to my porch, circled the cabin, and then led away, not toward the road, but into the woods in the direction of the Redman cabin. I drove straight back to San Francisco that day, not even stopping to return the keys to Terry. I mailed them instead, with a brief note saying a family emergency had called me back. I didn't mention what I'd found or what I'd heard. I don't know why. A month later, I was scrolling through news online when a headline caught my eye. New evidence in Redman family murders. The article mentioned that investigators had reopened the case after finding additional photographs buried in another location near the cabin. These photos showed the killer had been stalking multiple families in the area over several years. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, that makes me jerk awake at 3 in the morning listening for footsteps that aren't there. the maintenance worker they'd identified as the killer 3 years ago. Turns out he might not have acted alone. The new evidence suggested a possible accomplice who was never identified, someone who might still be out there, someone who might still return to those woods, to those cabins, following old footpaths through the trees. I don't know whose footprints I saw that morning. I don't know who walked on my porch in the dead of night. But sometimes I wonder if they're still walking those woods, watching through windows, waiting for the right moment to see what someone else looks like when they lose hope. Story 12. It was the middle of January, one of those brutally cold nights where everything outside was covered in snow. We'd had a decent snowfall earlier that day. Nothing major, maybe 3 or 4 inches, but enough to blanket everything. I remember checking the weather before bed, seeing the temperature was supposed to drop to around 15 degrees overnight. I went to bed around 11, like I usually do. Nothing unusual about my routine. Brushed my teeth, set my alarm for work, scrolled through my phone for a bit. My house is pretty old, built in the 70s, so it makes all kinds of noises, especially in winter when the temperatures drop. You get used to the normal sounds, the heating kicking on, the walls contracting in the cold. But what woke me up that night wasn't one of those normal sounds. I jolted awake around 2:30 in the morning to a loud creaking noise. It wasn't like the usual house settling sounds. This was sharper, more distinct. It sounded like weight on an old floorboard. My first thought was that maybe the snow was causing issues with the roof. We'd had problems last winter with ice dams, and I really didn't want to deal with water damage again. I got out of bed, still half asleep. I didn't turn on any lights because I didn't want to wake myself up completely. You know how it is. If you fully wake up in the middle of the night, it's almost impossible to get back to sleep. So I was just going to check things out quickly and get back to bed. The spare room is right next to mine, so I checked there first. I couldn't see anything wrong with the ceiling, no obvious wet spots or anything. I went to the window to see how bad the snow was. The moonlight was reflecting off the snow, so I could see pretty well, even without turning on lights. It didn't look that heavy, definitely not enough to cause structural issues. I was starting to think maybe I'd dreamed the noise. Since I was up, I figured I might as well check the second bedroom too, just to be safe. This room is across the hall, and I use it mostly for storage. As I walked in, something felt wrong immediately. My foot stepped on something cold and wet. At first, I thought maybe the roof was leaking after all, and I just hadn't noticed it in the other room. I reached down to feel the carpet. It was definitely wet, but just in a small spot, maybe the size of a dinner plate. Weird. I took another step and felt another wet spot. Now I was getting concerned. I carefully moved around the room and realized there were several damp spots on the carpet. They seemed to be in some kind of pattern. I finally decided to turn on the light. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were about a dozen wet spots in a line across the floor. They weren't random, they were footprints. Someone had walked through the snow outside and then through my house, leaving a trail of melting snow behind them. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. The footprints led from the window to the door. The window was closed but not locked. I sometimes crack it open for air and forget to lock it afterward. Someone had opened it, climbed in, and walked through my house while I was sleeping. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I followed the trail out into the hallway. The footprints continued down the hall, toward my bedroom. That's when true panic set in. Someone had been in my bedroom while I was sleeping. But here's the thing that still makes me feel sick when I think about it. When I got out of bed to investigate the noise, I hadn't stepped in any wet spots. There were no footprints leading from my bedroom when I first got up, which means the intruder entered my bedroom after I had gotten up. Possibly while I was standing at the window in the spare room. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They could still be in the house. I didn't even think. I just ran. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, slipped on my shoes by the front door, and got the hell out of there. I didn't even grab a coat, just ran outside in my pajamas into the freezing night. I called the police from my car, where I'd locked myself in with the engine running for heat. I was shaking so badly I could barely explain what was happening. They arrived within 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. 3 officers searched my house. They found no one inside, but they confirmed the wet footprints. They were already starting to dry by then, but you could still see them clearly, leading from the second bedroom window through the hall and into my bedroom. The officers found where the person had disturbed the snow outside my window, showing how they'd climbed in. The most terrifying part? They found footprints in the snow leading away from my house, but they stopped at the street. The person had probably gotten into a vehicle. They'd planned this. They hadn't randomly chosen my house. They came prepared with transportation. The police took photos and filed a report. They asked if anything was missing, but nothing was. Nothing was disturbed or moved as far as I could tell. This wasn't a robbery. This person had come into my house and into my bedroom while I was sleeping, and then left without taking anything. What the hell did they want? I stayed at a hotel that night. The next day, I had all my locks changed and installed a security system with cameras. I put in window alarms too, but I still don't feel safe. The police think the creaking sound that initially woke me was either the person entering through the window or possibly them leaving the house when they realized I was up and moving around. Maybe they hid somewhere while I was checking the spare room, then slipped into my bedroom after I walked past. Or maybe they were leaving when I heard the creak and I just missed seeing them. What keeps me up at night is not knowing who it was or what they wanted. Was it random? Was I specifically targeted? Were they planning to hurt me? Rob me, just watch me sleep? I don't know which possibility is worse. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head. Sometimes I think I remember seeing a shadow move as I was looking out the window in the spare room, but I can't be sure if that's a real memory or something my brain has created afterward. I've started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. I check every closet, under every bed, behind every door before I can even try to sleep. The police haven't found anything. No fingerprints, no evidence beyond the footprints that were already fading by the time they documented them. They've increased patrols in my neighborhood, but there haven't been any similar incidents reported. Some of my friends have suggested it could have been someone who knew me, maybe watching my habits, knowing I live alone. That thought makes me feel even worse. I've started looking at everyone differently. Neighbors, co-workers, people I date. Could it have been one of them? I've considered moving, but I'm not in a financial position to do that right now. So I'm stuck in this house where someone violated my sense of safety in the most fundamental way. Every night when I lay down, I think about how someone stood in my room, possibly watching me sleep. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up to that creak. I leave lights on all night now. I've put a chair against my bedroom door. Sometimes I sleep on the couch instead, where I can see all the entry points to my house at once. I'm exhausted all the time from the lack of proper sleep. The thing that haunts me most is that I'll never know who it was or why they came into my home that night. Were they just passing through? Was it some kind of sick game? Were they planning something worse that got interrupted when I woke up? I'll probably never have answers. So that's why I'm sharing this here. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe someone has advice beyond the security measures I've already taken. Or maybe this will just serve as a warning to always lock your windows, even in the dead of winter when you think no one would be crazy enough to be out in the snow in the middle of the night. Because someone who walked through the snow, climbed through my window, and stood in my bedroom while I slept. Someone who's still out there. No, Faye. Story 13. I still can't explain what happened that day in Shadowcrest Forest. It's been 6 months and I haven't gone hiking since. My parents think I'm just going through a phase, but they don't know what I heard. They didn't hear it. Only Emily and I did. I was 15 when it happened. My family had been planning this hike for weeks. My dad, Robert, is big on unplugging from technology and reconnecting with nature. Mom, Sarah, was totally on board, and even my 4-year-old sister Emily was excited about seeing squirrels and collecting rocks. I was less enthusiastic, but went along with it because, well, that's what you do when you're a teenager stuck with your family on a weekend. Shadowcrest Forest isn't exactly remote. It's about an hour's drive from our house, and there's usually a decent number of hikers on the main trails. But Dad wanted to take us on this special route he'd discovered during a solo hike the previous month. He kept talking about this amazing viewpoint that not many people know about. I remember rolling my eyes when he said that, but I had no idea how much I'd regret going to that spot. We arrived at the trailhead around 9 in the morning. It was mid-October, perfect hiking weather. Not too hot, not too cold. The forest was absolutely gorgeous with all the fall colors, red, orange, and yellow leaves everywhere. The trail started out wide and well maintained, with other hikers passing by occasionally. Mom had Emily by the hand, pointing out different birds and plants. Dad led the way with his backpack full of sandwiches, trail mix, and water bottles. I followed behind, half-heartedly taking photos with my phone to show my friends later. About 2 hours in, Dad veered off the main path onto a narrower trail. "This is it," he said excitedly. Most people miss this turnoff. The trail became steeper and rougher with roots and rocks that made it harder to walk. I noticed we hadn't seen another hiker for at least 30 minutes. Emily was getting tired, so Dad hoisted her onto his shoulders. "Almost there, kiddo," he assured her. "The view is worth it." After another 45 minutes of hiking, the forest opened up to this incredible rocky outcrop that jutted out over a valley. The view was genuinely breathtaking. Miles of forest stretching out below us, a river winding through it like a silver ribbon, and mountains in the distance. Even I had to admit it was pretty awesome. "Told you," Dad said, grinning at me. I gave him a small smile back. Mom spread out a blanket on a flat section of rock, and Dad started unpacking our lunch. Emily was thrilled to be free from walking and immediately began exploring the area, picking up interesting rocks and leaves. I walked to the edge of the outcrop, staying a safe distance back, and that's when I first noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet, completely quiet. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, no leaves rustling, just silence. It was so sudden that I actually looked around, confused. Forests aren't supposed to go silent like that, right? "Hey, do you guys notice?" I started to ask, but Mom cut me off. "Alex, can you help me with these containers?" she called. I shrugged off the weird feeling and went to help her unpack lunch. Emily was playing about 10 feet away, too close to the edge for my comfort. "Em, come back a bit," I called. She ignored me, focused on some colorful leaves. That's when I heard it for the first time. A voice, distant and faint, like someone was talking through static. I couldn't make out any words, just the cadence of speech. I looked around, thinking maybe another hiker had shown up. "Did you hear that?" I asked my parents. "Hear what?" Dad replied, not really paying attention as he wrestled with the cap of his water bottle. That voice, someone talking. Mom glanced up, listening for a moment. "I don't hear anything, honey, probably just the wind." But there was no wind, not even a breeze. The air was completely still. I walked over to get Emily away from the edge, and the voice became slightly clearer. It definitely wasn't the wind. It was a man's voice, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. The sound seemed to be coming from the forest below us, but also somehow all around us. It's hard to explain. "Emily, come on, lunchtime," I said, taking her hand. She looked up at me, then past me, her expression changing from happy to confused. "Who's that man?" she asked, pointing toward the trees behind us. I spun around, heart suddenly racing, but saw nothing, just trees and rocks. "What man, Em? There's nobody there." "The talking man," she said simply, still staring past me. A chill ran down my spine. She heard it too. A 4-year-old with no reason to make this up had heard the same voice I was hearing. "Mom, Dad," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we should go." "We just got here, Alex," Mom said, arranging sandwiches on paper plates. "Come eat first." "No, I really think we should go," I insisted, still holding Emily's hand. "There's someone out there." Dad finally looked up, his expression changing from annoyed to concerned. "What do you mean, someone?" Before I could answer, the voice came again, louder this time, clearer. It sounded like a man speaking through a broken radio, words cutting in and out. "Found you. Watching." Since you, careful of the edge. Emily squeezed my hand tightly. The talking man is getting closer, she whispered. My blood ran cold. I stared at my parents, who were looking at us with confusion, not fear. They couldn't hear it. There's a voice, I said, my own voice shaking now. Emily can hear it too. Someone's out there talking about us, about the edge of the cliff. We need to go, now. Dad stood up, finally taking me seriously. He scanned the tree line, then the path we'd come from. I don't see anyone, he said, but his posture had changed. He was on alert now. Robert, maybe we should pack up, Mom suggested, her eyes darting between me and Emily. I could tell she was torn between thinking we were overreacting and trusting that something was actually wrong. The voice came again, much louder now, as if whoever or whatever was speaking had moved right up to the edge of the clearing. Watch the girl, near the edge, not safe. I can see you all. Emily started crying. I picked her up, hands shaking. We need to go right now, I said, no longer caring if I sounded scared. Dad must have seen the genuine fear in my face because he immediately started shoving things back into his backpack. Okay, we're going. Sarah grabbed the blanket. As we hurriedly packed up, the voice became a constant stream of broken phrases. Coming closer. Don't run. Stay longer. Beautiful family. Want to know you. The worst part was that it sounded like it was coming from multiple directions now, as if whoever was speaking was circling us. Yet my parents still showed no sign of hearing anything. They were moving quickly, but out of concern for our fear, not because they themselves were afraid. Stay together, Dad said firmly once everything was packed. Alex, keep hold of Emily. Sarah, you're behind me. Kids in the middle. We started back down the trail, moving as fast as we safely could on the rocky path. I kept Emily close, one arm around her shoulders. She had her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. The voice followed us. Why leaving? Just want to talk. Come back. Come back. It was getting angrier, more insistent. I could feel myself trembling, trying not to break into a run on the treacherous path. Alex, what's it saying now? Mom asked quietly as we hurried along. The fact that she believed us enough to ask that question only made me more terrified. It wants us to come back, I whispered. It's getting angry. Dad's jaw tightened. He picked up Emily and started moving faster. We'll be back at the main trail soon, he assured us. Though I could hear the tension in his voice, the voice changed again, becoming almost a growl. Don't leave me. Been so lonely. Need company, especially the little one. Emily buried her face in Dad's shoulder. I felt tears welling in my eyes from pure fear. When we finally reached the main trail, I expected the voice to stop. It didn't. It followed us, growing fainter as we moved faster on the wider path, but still there, still talking, still threatening. We passed other hikers who smiled and nodded at us, completely unaware of the horror we were experiencing. I wanted to scream at them, to warn them, but what would I say? That there was a voice only my sister and I could hear. The voice finally began to fade when we reached the parking lot. As Dad unlocked the car with shaking hands, I heard it one last time, so faint I almost missed it. We'll wait for you. Come back soon. Know your faces now. The drive home was completely silent. Emily fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from fear and crying. Mom kept looking back at us with worried eyes. Dad gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. We never talked about what happened. Not really. The next day, Mom asked Emily if she remembered the man in the forest, and Emily just shook her head and changed the subject. When Mom tried to ask me about it, I shut down. I couldn't bring myself to repeat the things I'd heard. My parents probably think we saw a creepy hiker who scared us, or that we both got spooked by normal forest sounds. They don't understand that what we heard wasn't human, couldn't have been human. No person could have spoken from all directions at once, could have followed us so perfectly without ever being seen. I've spent hours researching Shadowcrest Forest online, looking for similar experiences. I've found nothing concrete, just vague mentions in forums about strange sounds and feelings of being watched. Nothing about voices that only children can hear. Sometimes I wonder if we should go back, with more people, with recording equipment, to try to capture evidence of whatever is out there. But then I remember Emily's tears, the pure terror in her voice when she asked about the talking man, and I know I could never set foot in those woods again. I don't know what was watching us that day. I don't know why it could only be heard by Emily and me. I don't know what it wanted, especially with my little sister. All I know is that sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I think I hear it again, just at the edge of hearing, a whisper through static. Come back soon. And I know, with absolute certainty, that if we had stayed on that rocky outcrop any longer, one of us, or maybe all of us, would never have made it home. Story 14. I've lived in this little town on the southern edge of Gary, Indiana my whole life. It's nothing special. Just your typical Midwest place where everyone knows everyone else's business, and the biggest excitement is usually the high school football games on Friday nights. My house sits at the edge of town, bordering this dense forest that stretches for miles. Growing up, I loved having the woods as my backyard. Me and my buddies would spend hours exploring, building forts, and pretending we were survivalists. But something changed last fall, something that's made me afraid of those same woods I once loved. It started with little things I could easily dismiss. Weird lights deep in the trees at night that didn't match up with any trails or roads. Strange noises that didn't sound like the usual forest creatures. At first, I figured it was just teenagers partying or maybe some hunters setting up before season. Nothing worth getting worked up about. I've always enjoyed having bonfires in my backyard. There's something peaceful about sitting alone by the fire, having a few beers, and just unwinding after work. My fire pit is only about 10 feet from the tree line, close enough to feel like you're in the woods but still in the safety of my yard. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night in early October. The air had that perfect fall crispness, and I decided to light a fire after dinner. Around 9:30, when the fire was dying down, I heard it. Footsteps in the dry leaves just beyond the trees. Slow, deliberate steps. Step, crunch, pause. Step, crunch, pause. Like whatever it was wanted me to hear it. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" Thinking maybe it was my neighbor's kid trying to scare me. No response, just another step, crunch, pause. The footsteps continued, moving parallel to the edge of my property. I stood up, grabbing my flashlight to shine it toward the trees. The beam barely penetrated the dense foliage, and I couldn't see anything unusual, but the footsteps kept going, still at that same measured pace. Then they stopped. Complete silence for maybe 15 seconds, and that's when it happened. The footsteps suddenly charged directly toward me, crashing through the underbrush at full speed. It wasn't the sound of a deer or some animal on four legs. These were bipedal footsteps, heavy and purposeful. I didn't stick around to see what was making them. I dropped my beer, ran inside, locked the door, and watched through the window, heart pounding in my chest. Nothing emerged from the tree line. The fire continued to burn down to embers. After 30 minutes of watching with every light in my house turned on, I convinced myself it must have been a deer that got spooked, even though deep down I knew deer don't move like that. I almost forgot about it until it happened again 2 weeks later. Same scenario, me alone by the fire, around the same time of night. The slow, methodical footsteps started again, this time from a different section of the woods. Step, crunch, pause. That same deliberately slow pace. This time I was prepared. I had my high-powered flashlight ready and my phone to record whatever might come out. "I know someone's there," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This is private property." The footsteps continued their pattern, moving along the tree line just like before. I shined my light in their direction, but again saw nothing. Then, just like the first time, the footsteps stopped completely. I tensed up, knowing what was coming. Sure enough, after a brief silence, I heard the crashing rush of something big charging directly toward me through the trees. I fumbled with my phone, trying to record while backpedaling toward my house. I didn't even attempt to get video, I just hit record and ran. The audio captured my panicked breathing and the sound of something large moving rapidly through the underbrush, but nothing visual. After that second incident, I told a couple friends about it over beers at Malone's, our local bar. They laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just a homeless person trying to scare me, or maybe a black bear, even though they're extremely rare in our area. My buddy Matt suggested setting up a trail cam. I thought that was a good idea and ordered one online the next day. Before the camera arrived, it happened a third time. This time my girlfriend had cancelled our plans, so I was alone again having a bonfire on a Friday night. Same pattern, the slow walking, the pause, then the charge. This time, whatever it was seemed to come even closer to breaking through the tree line before I made it inside. I swear I could hear breathing, heavy, raspy breathing, mixed in with the sound of the footsteps and cracking branches. That was enough for me. I decided right then that I wouldn't have any more bonfires alone. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. It felt predatory. The trail cam arrived 3 days later. I set it up facing the section of woods where the footsteps had come from, but for 2 weeks it captured nothing unusual. Just raccoons, possums, and a few deer. No sign of whatever had been stalking me. By mid-November, I'd started having bonfires again, but only when friends were over. Nothing happened when other people were around, which made me wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing or blown some natural forest sounds out of proportion. Then came the night that changed everything, the night I still have nightmares about. My friend Chris and I decided to take an evening hike on one of the trails that runs through the forest behind my house. It was stupid, I know that now, but at that point I'd convinced myself I was overreacting to the earlier incidents. The trail is well marked and loops around for about 3 miles before returning to a point about 5 minutes from my back door. We started around 4:30 in the afternoon, figuring we'd finish before it got completely dark. We'd done this hike dozens of times before. The trail cuts through dense woods and skirts some marshy wetlands that form after heavy rain. That day had been overcast but dry, with that heavy stillness in the air that sometimes comes before a storm. We were about halfway through the loop, in one of the most remote sections where the wetlands spread out on both sides of the trail, leaving us on a narrow strip of solid ground with water and trees in every direction. That's when we heard it, a shriek that started as a low howl and climbed to a pitch that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. "What the hell was that?" Chris asked, stopping in his tracks. "Probably just a fox or something," I said, but I didn't believe it. I'd heard fox calls and coyotes and every other animal in these woods. This was different, almost like a human scream but distorted, with this weird warbling quality that made it sound wrong. We stood still, listening. The sound had come from somewhere far ahead of us, maybe a quarter-mile away. After a minute of silence, we started walking again, both of us more alert now. "You've lived here forever, man. You ever heard anything like that before?" Chris asked, his voice lower than normal. I shook my head. Never. We'd gone maybe another 50 yards when we heard it again. The same exact howling shriek. But this time it wasn't coming from ahead of us. It was right beside us, just off the trail in the dense underbrush. So close it felt like whatever made it was practically touching us. We both froze. I remember feeling like my heart had actually stopped beating for a second. The sound had been so close I could practically feel the vibration of it in my chest. "What the f..." Chris started to say, but then the shriek came again, this time from behind us, back the way we had come. Same sound, same volume, but now in a completely different location. That's when I realized what was happening. The thing was moving. Not just moving, but moving impossibly fast. No animal could cover that distance in seconds without us hearing it crash through the underbrush or splash through the water. "We need to go," I whispered, grabbing Chris's arm. "Now." We started walking quickly, trying not to run, but moving as fast as we could without making too much noise. The path ahead curved around a stand of trees, and just as we reached the bend, the shriek came again, this time from directly in front of us, blocking our path forward. We spun around, ready to retreat, when the sound came from behind us too, then from the left, then the right. It was surrounding us, coming from all directions at once, each howl overlapping the next, until it felt like we were in the center of a circle of these things. I'm not ashamed to admit what happened next. The fear hit me so hard and so deep that I lost control of my bladder. I felt the warm wetness spreading down my leg as I stood there paralyzed. Chris was hyperventilating beside me, his eyes wide and darting around, trying to spot whatever was making the sounds. The shrieking continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. Not just the absence of the howling, but the absence of all sound. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves, nothing. "Run," I whispered, and we did. We sprinted down that trail like our lives depended on it, which I firmly believe they did. Neither of us looked back. Neither of us stopped until we burst out of the tree line near my house, gasping for breath, covered in sweat despite the cold. We didn't talk about what happened that night. We couldn't. What would we say? That we were surrounded by some kind of creature that could teleport or move faster than humanly possible? That the woods behind my house are haunted by something that stalks people for fun? It sounds crazy. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know Chris felt it too. I've never seen terror like what was on his face that day. He won't go near the woods anymore. Neither will I. I sleep with a semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle next to my bed now. I keep the curtains closed at night. I've thought about moving, but this is my home. And whatever that thing is, it hasn't come onto my property since that day. It's like it's waiting for me to come back to the woods, waiting for me to get comfortable again and let my guard down. Sometimes at night, I still hear that shriek in the distance. I don't know what's out there in those woods. I don't want to know, but I'll never forget the sound it made or the fear I felt when it surrounded us. Some things you just can't explain, and some fears never really go away. Story 15 minutes. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since our camping trip to northern Canada, and I keep waking up in cold sweats with this heaviness in my chest. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural or whatever, but what happened out there in those woods, I just need to tell someone about it. Jason and I have been friends since college. We try to do one big outdoor trip every year, and this time we decided on a winter camping expedition in the boreal forests about 6 hours north of Edmonton. We're both experienced campers, have all the right gear, and Jason even worked as a park ranger for a few years. We weren't being reckless. Our first day went perfectly. We hiked about 8 miles to a small clearing near a frozen creek, set up our tent, and got a fire going. The temperature was dropping fast as the sun went down, probably around 15 degrees below zero, but we were prepared for it. After dinner, Jason mentioned we needed more firewood to keep the fire going through the night. "I'll grab some," I offered, reaching for my headlamp. "Could use a stretch anyway." Jason nodded, poking at the fire. "Don't go too far. Stay within shouting distance." I remember rolling my eyes. "I've been camping since I was 10, man. I think I can handle collecting firewood." Stupid, so stupid of me. I grabbed my flashlight instead of my headlamp because the strap had been irritating my forehead earlier. I zipped up my down jacket and headed into the tree line. The snow was about knee-deep in places, but it was that dry, powdery snow that's easy enough to walk through. I started gathering fallen branches, breaking them to check if they were dry enough to burn. I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point, I realized I'd wandered farther than I intended. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, tall black spruces and pines jutting up from the snow. I turned around to head back toward the orange glow of our campfire but couldn't see it anymore. No big deal, I thought. I'll just retrace my steps. Except my tracks had already partially filled with drifting snow, and there were multiple paths where I'd wandered around looking for wood. I tried to use the stars to orient myself, but the forest canopy was too thick to see much of the sky. That's when the first twinge of panic hit me. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but of course there was no signal out there. I patted my other pocket for the emergency whistle I always bring camping. It wasn't there. I suddenly remembered switching jackets earlier when I got too warm setting up the tent. The whistle was in my other coat back at camp. Still, I wasn't going to freak out. Jason and I had been in tougher situations. I decided to call out, but then hesitated. It felt embarrassing to admit I'd gotten lost barely 100 yards from camp. I figured I could find my way back on my own if I just kept my head. So instead of shouting for help like a sensible person, I picked a direction that felt right and started walking. Big mistake. After about 10 minutes, nothing looked familiar. The snow had picked up and fat flakes were falling through my flashlight beam. The wind had kicked up too, making that eerie whistling sound as it pushed through the trees. My fingers were starting to ache from the cold despite my gloves, and I was lugging an armful of branches that I now realized I should have dropped long ago. I finally swallowed my pride and called out, "Jason, hey, can you hear me?" My voice sounded small in the vastness of the forest. I waited, listening, nothing but the wind. I shouted again, louder this time, "Jason!" That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But then it came again, a long, wavering wail that seemed to float through the trees. It wasn't a wolf howl, I've heard those plenty of times. It wasn't the scream of a cougar or any animal I recognized. It was wrong somehow, too modulated, almost musical, but in a discordant way that made the hair on my neck stand up. My arms were suddenly covered in goosebumps that had nothing to do with the cold. I dropped the firewood and spun around, sweeping my flashlight through the trees. "Jason!" I shouted again, panic finally breaking through. "Jason, where are you?" The wailing stopped. The forest went completely silent, that unnatural silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I started walking faster, picking a direction and sticking to it, figuring any direction was better than standing still. My breath came out in rapid white clouds. I kept shouting Jason's name every few seconds, no longer caring how stupid I looked. That's when I saw it. About 30 yards ahead, perched on a large rock, was something. My flashlight beam caught it and I froze mid-step. It looked canine at first glance, the general shape of a wolf or large coyote, but something was immediately, terribly wrong. It was much larger than any wolf I'd ever seen, probably standing chest high to me if it had been on the ground instead of elevated on the rock. Its proportions were all wrong, legs too long and jointed strangely, neck too thin for its broad shoulders. But it was the face that made my stomach drop. It was angular, almost triangular, with a muzzle that seemed too short and jaws that looked too wide, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They were huge, much larger than any wolf's should be, and they didn't catch my flashlight beam. They didn't reflect light like an animal's eyes should. They were just dark, deep. Looking at them made me feel like I was staring into something bottomless. The thing was completely, unnaturally still. Not the alertness of a predator about to pounce, but a stillness that seemed impossible for a living creature. It didn't blink, it didn't shift its weight, it didn't even seem to breathe. It just watched me. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to scare it off. Nothing, not even a twitch. I stamped my foot and waved my arms. "Go on! Get out of here!" The creature didn't move, didn't react at all. That's when true fear, not panic, not anxiety, but genuine terror, washed over me, because nothing alive should be that still, nothing natural should be that unresponsive. I raised my flashlight directly at its face, and that's when our eyes truly met. I don't know how to explain what happened next. It's like, have you ever been to a funeral of someone you loved deeply? That crushing weight of grief that presses down on your chest until you can barely breathe? That's what flooded through me when I looked into those eyes, eyes that were wide and deep like the sea, a sadness so profound it felt ancient, like it had existed long before me and would continue long after I was gone. But mixed with that sadness was fear, not my fear of it, but something deeper. It felt like looking at that thing was showing me something humans weren't supposed to see, some truth we aren't equipped to handle. I don't know how long we stared at each other. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt wrong, stretched out like taffy. I just know that when I finally managed to tear my eyes away, I felt different, like a piece of me had been taken. Or maybe like something else had been put in its place. I turned and ran. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just needed to get away from those eyes. I screamed Jason's name over and over as I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I don't know how long I ran before I heard him calling back. "Marcus! Marcus! I'm over here!" I've never been so relieved to hear anyone's voice in my life. I followed the sound, and suddenly there was our campsite with the tent and the fire which had burned down to embers. Jason was standing at the edge of the clearing with his own flashlight, looking worried. "Dude, where the hell have you been? I was about to come looking for you." I couldn't speak at first. I just stood there, panting, hands on my knees. Got lost. I finally managed. "Sorry." I didn't tell him about what I'd seen. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. We went back to the tent, and I pretended to fall asleep, but I lay awake all night, listening to every sound outside our tent. The next morning I made an excuse to check the area where I thought I'd seen the creature. There were no tracks in the snow, nothing to indicate anything had been there at all. We packed up and hiked out that day. I told Jason I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. I felt hollow, like something fundamental had been scooped out of me. I know what you're probably thinking. Fear and disorientation can make your mind play tricks. The cold, the darkness, the stress of being lost, all of it could explain what I saw. That's what the rational part of my brain keeps trying to tell me. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt when I looked into those eyes. It wasn't natural. It wasn't of this world. For those few moments, it felt like I wasn't on Earth anymore. I keep telling myself I'll get over it, that the memory will fade and I'll go back to normal. But 3 weeks later, I still wake up with those eyes in my mind. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear that wailing sound, drifting through the walls like it's calling to whatever part of me it took that night in the forest. Story 16. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family and closest friends, but after all these years, I still can't explain what happened. Maybe writing it down will help make sense of it, or at least let me put it behind me, once and for all. This happened 20 years ago, back in 2003. I'd just landed a decent job at a law firm and found what seemed like the perfect flat in this Victorian building called Inglewood in Folshaw Park South. It was this massive 4-story building nestled between Wilmslow and Alderley Edge. Really nice area, honestly. I was thrilled to get a 1-bedroom on the top floor. The location was perfect. I could walk to work, and Manchester was just a quick train ride away for nights out with mates. The first few weeks were fine. The flat was spacious enough for a single bloke, and the rent was reasonable given the location. My landlord was this older guy, ex-RAF veteran who lived on the ground floor, quiet, kept to himself mostly, but always polite when we passed each other. There were about 8 flats in total, I think. I remember Anne lived across from me, lovely woman in her 50s who worked as a nurse. I can't pinpoint exactly when things started to feel off. It was gradual. I'd come home after work, and the flat just didn't feel welcoming anymore. I started avoiding the front room. Can't really explain why. It just felt uncomfortable to be in there. I found myself eating meals in the kitchen or even bringing plates to my bedroom instead of using the living room like a normal person. The bathroom was another issue. I couldn't shower with the door closed. I literally could not bring myself to do it. I'd leave it wide open so I could see down the corridor. Something about losing sight of that hallway made my skin crawl. Writing this now makes me sound completely mental, but I swear I'm not usually like this. I've lived in plenty of places before and since without feeling anything like this. Then there was my bedroom door. It never stayed closed at night, even though it would stay shut perfectly fine during the day. I'd close it before getting into bed and somehow it would be open when I woke up. I even tried wedging things against it, but I'd still wake up in the middle of the night, bolt upright, heart racing, to find it standing open. It got to the point where I'd wake up multiple times every night just staring at that doorway. I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings settle, maybe there were drafts, whatever. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The whole flat had this atmosphere that's hard to describe. Not exactly cold, but unwelcoming. Like the space itself didn't want me there. My girlfriend at the time, who later became my ex-wife, only visited once. Just once. She refused to come back after that first visit. She said the place felt dark and troublesome. Those were her exact words. I remember laughing it off, saying she was being dramatic, but honestly, I was relieved when she suggested we always meet at her place instead. I stuck it out for almost a year, partly because I'd signed a lease, partly because moving is such a hassle, and partly because I kept telling myself I was imagining things. But by the end, I was spending as little time there as possible. I'd work late, go to the pub, visit friends, anything to avoid being alone in that flat. When my lease was finally up, I couldn't wait to get out. I found a new place closer to work and arranged to move out on a Saturday in July. I remember it was unusually hot that day. I started packing early in the morning, wanting to be done before nightfall. Around 4 in the afternoon, my landlord came up to remind me that we needed to check the electricity meter in the basement before I left. I'd completely forgotten about that. The basement wasn't normally accessible to tenants, only the landlord had a key. I'd never even been down there before. We went down together around 6 o'clock. The basement entrance was right next to the main entrance of the building on the ground floor. It was this heavy wooden door with an old-fashioned lock. The staircase leading down was narrow and steep with just a single bare bulb lighting the way. The basement itself was divided into sections for each flat, with cage-like wire partitions separating the storage areas. It was damp and smelled of mold and something else I couldn't identify, something almost metallic. The lighting was terrible. Just a few bulbs hanging from the ceiling, creating more shadows than illumination. My landlord led me to the area designated for my flat, and that's when I noticed two things that made my skin crawl. First, there were electrical wires running along the ceiling with melted rubber covering, like they'd been exposed to extreme heat at some point. When I pointed them out, my landlord just shrugged and said the wiring in old buildings could be dodgy. The second thing was worse. In my storage section, on the bare brick wall, were children's crayon drawings. Just simple, crude things. Stick figures, a house, what looked like a sun. But they were unmistakably done by a child. I asked my landlord about them, trying to sound casual, and he seemed genuinely confused. Said he had no idea, maybe from previous tenants. But I'd been the only person living in that flat for the past year, and according to him, the previous tenant had been an elderly man who lived alone. We took the meter reading quickly. I just wanted to get out of there. The whole time, I felt like someone was watching us from the darkest corners of the basement. My landlord locked up behind us, and I went back to finish packing. It took about 10 trips up and down the stairs to get everything to my car. By the 9th trip, it was starting to get dark outside, and the building felt even more oppressive than usual. I was carrying the last few bags, feeling relieved that I was almost done. I was coming down from the top floor, bags in hand, when I reached the ground floor landing. The main entrance was straight ahead, and the basement door was on the right. As I approached, I heard it. Bam, 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 violent, repeated banging from behind the basement door, not knocking. This was aggressive pounding, like someone was using their entire body to hit the door from the inside. Bam, 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 pause, then again, bam, 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 bam. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. There were no voices, no calls for help, just that relentless, angry pounding. The door was visibly shaking with each impact. I stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. The banging continued, getting more frantic. I couldn't process what was happening. My landlord had the only key, and I'd watched him lock that door hours earlier. There shouldn't have been anyone down there. I couldn't make myself walk past that door. I just couldn't. The thought of being near it while whatever was on the other side was trying to get out. I still get chills thinking about it. I turned around and knocked on Anne's door instead, making up some rubbish about having extra food in my freezer I wanted to offer her before leaving, anything to avoid passing that basement door alone. When she answered, the banging suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Anne didn't seem to have heard anything. She came with me to check my freezer, which was awkwardly nearly empty, and by then I'd calmed down enough to finish moving my things. I made sure Anne was with me as I passed the basement door again. Nothing. No sound at all. I debated whether to tell my landlord. But what would I say? That I heard something in a locked basement that only he had access to? That there were children's drawings in a space no child should have been in? It sounded mental, even to me. So I finished loading my car, handed over my keys, and left Inglewood for good. I drove to my new place that night and never set foot in that building again. Here's the thing that still haunts me. In the entire year I lived there, I never heard a single sound from that basement. Not once. No one ever mentioned going down there or hearing anything strange. So why, on the very day I was leaving, did something suddenly want to make its presence known? What was trying to get out? Or was it trying to prevent me from leaving? I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe someone had gotten locked in somehow. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the old pipes were making noise in the heat. But none of those explanations feel right. I drove past Inglewood a few years ago. The building had been converted into luxury apartments, completely renovated. I wondered if they'd changed the basement too, if they'd found anything during the renovation. I was tempted to stop and ask, but something held me back. Some things are better left unknown. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I've heard that bam, 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 bam coming from somewhere in my house, and I still can't sleep with my bedroom door closed. Story 17. I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes, thinking about what I saw that day at Cascade Lake back in 2015. I've lived on Orcas Island for most of my adult life, and I always thought I knew every inch of this place. It's funny how something so familiar can suddenly become so alien and terrifying. It was mid-July, one of those perfect Pacific Northwest summer days where the temperature hits the sweet spot. Warm enough to swim, but not so hot you're desperate for shade. My girlfriend Jen and I had packed a cooler with some beers and sandwiches, loaded up my 2 dogs, Duke, my 7-year-old lab mix, and Pepper, my younger border collie, and headed to Cascade Lake for a day of swimming and relaxing. We'd been there 100 times before. It's one of the bigger freshwater lakes on the island and pretty popular with locals, especially during summer. There's this perfect little cove on the eastern side where the bottom stays shallow for a good distance out, making it ideal for letting the dogs swim without worrying too much about them going too far. We arrived around 11 in the morning and lucked out finding a spot away from the main beach area. I remember being in such a good mood, joking with Jen about how we should just quit our jobs and spend every day like this. The dogs were beyond excited, running back and forth along the shoreline while we set up our blankets and unpacked. Duke was always the water dog. He'd happily swim for hours if I let him. Pepper was more cautious, preferring to wade in the shallows and bark at Duke's swimming adventures. Everything was completely normal for the first couple hours. We swam, threw sticks for the dogs, had lunch, and I even dozed off for a bit in the sun. It was around 2 in the afternoon when things started getting weird. I was sitting on our blanket, scrolling through my phone while Jen was reading a book. Duke had been paddling around near the shore, but suddenly he started swimming toward the center of the lake. At first I didn't think much of it. He sometimes chases ducks or gets distracted, but his behavior was different. He was swimming fast in a straight line, like something was after him. "Duke," I called out, standing up. "Duke, come back." He didn't even turn his head. By now he was maybe 40 yards from shore and still going. I started to panic. "What's wrong with him?" Jen asked, putting her book down. "I don't know. He's never done this before." I was about to strip down to my swimsuit to go after him when he suddenly made a sharp turn and started swimming parallel to the shore, still frantic. Then, just as abruptly, he turned back toward us and swam like his life depended on it. When he reached the shallows, he didn't slow down. He charged out of the water, past us, and up to where our car was parked, shaking violently. Pepper, who had been napping in a patch of shade, was now fully alert, hackles raised, staring out at the lake. She started making this low growling sound I'd never heard from her before. "Something's wrong," I said, feeling the first real chill despite the warm day. Jen tried to calm Duke while I walked closer to the water's edge, scanning the lake's surface. It was mostly calm, with just a slight ripple from the breeze. Nothing looked out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had scared Duke badly. "Maybe he got a cramp," Jen suggested, but the look on her face told me she didn't believe that any more than I did. I called Pepper to follow me as I decided to walk along the shoreline a bit, thinking maybe there was another dog or animal that had somehow threatened Duke from the water. The shoreline curved around to a more secluded area where massive old trees grew right up to the water's edge, their roots sometimes extending into the lake itself. About 5 minutes into our walk, Pepper stopped dead in her tracks. Her ears were forward, body rigid, and she was staring at something near the water. I followed her gaze and saw what at first looked like an unusual root formation protruding from the bank. It almost resembled a dragon's head, with what appeared to be eye sockets and a snout-like projection. It was probably 4 feet long and partially submerged. I'm into photography, so I stepped closer to get a better look at this weird natural formation, thinking it would make a cool shot. That's when I noticed something in the water, about 20 feet away from the shore. At first glance, it looked like a floating log. We get a lot of driftwood in the lakes here, but something about it seemed off. It wasn't moving with the current or the light breeze like a log should. It was just stationary. As I squinted to get a better look, I realized with growing horror that what I was looking at wasn't a log at all. The log had features, a long, scaly snout, and eyes. Actual fucking eyes that were looking directly at me. My blood ran cold. I'm not talking about the kind of chill you get when you're watching a scary movie. This was primal terror, the kind that makes your muscles lock up and your breath catch in your throat. The thing was about 15 feet long from what I could see, dark, greenish black, with what looked like fin-like appendages just below the surface. But it was the eyes that really got to me, yellowish, unblinking, with vertical pupils like a reptile's. They were fixed on me with what I can only describe as predatory intelligence. Pepper started barking frantically, lunging forward and then backing up, clearly terrified but trying to protect me. The creature didn't move. It just kept staring, half submerged, as if calculating something. I backed away slowly, grabbing Pepper's collar to keep her from charging at the water. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to her. For what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds, the creature and I just stared at each other. Then, without any splash or disturbance, it slowly sank beneath the surface, leaving nothing but expanding ripples. I didn't wait around. I turned and ran, dragging Pepper with me, back toward our spot on the beach. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost when I got back to Jen, because she immediately stood up, alarmed. "Rachel, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet." I couldn't even form words properly. "We need to go. Now. Pack up. We need to go." "What? Why? What happened?" "Just, please. I'll explain in the car. We need to get the dogs and leave." I kept looking back at the water, half expecting to see that thing following us along the shoreline. Jen didn't argue further. She must have seen the genuine fear in my eyes. We packed our stuff in record time, loaded the still agitated dogs into the car, and left. Once we were driving away, Jen demanded an explanation. I told her what I'd seen, trying to sound rational, knowing how crazy it all sounded. To her credit, she didn't laugh or dismiss me outright, but I could tell she thought I'd seen a large fish or maybe a beaver, something ordinary that my imagination had transformed into something monstrous. "The lakes here are well documented, Rachel," she said gently. "If there were 15-foot reptiles swimming around, someone would have reported it before now." I didn't push it. I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how it sounded. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those unblinking yellow eyes staring back at me. The next day, I called my friend Mike, who's lived on the island his whole life and works as a ranger at Moran State Park. I didn't tell him exactly what I'd seen, just asked if he'd ever heard stories about water dragons or unusual creatures in Cascade Lake. There was a long pause on the line before he answered, and his tone had changed. "Where exactly were you at the lake?" I described the location, including the root formation that looked like a dragon's head. Another pause. "My grandfather used to tell stories," he finally said. "Said the old-timers would tie up goats near that part of the lake sometimes." "Goats? Why?" "To keep whatever was in there satisfied, so it wouldn't come looking for other things." A chill ran down my spine. "You're kidding, right?" "Look, it's just old stories," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But there was that guy they found dead near those same rocks last year. Remember? They said it was otters." I did remember. A tourist had been found mauled to death. The official explanation was that he'd somehow provoked a group of river otters which had attacked him. I remember thinking at the time how strange that explanation was. Otters aren't typically aggressive toward humans unless severely provoked. "Otters," I repeated. "Yeah, otters." The way Mike said it made it clear he didn't believe that explanation any more than I did. That evening, I finally got up the courage to really talk to Jen about what I'd seen. To my surprise, after her initial skepticism, she admitted something she'd never told me before. "When I was a kid," she said quietly, "my dad took me fishing on Cascade Lake early one morning. It was misty just after sunrise. I was leaning over the side of the boat, looking into the water, and I saw something. A long black shape gliding beneath us, much bigger than any fish that should have been in that lake. Dad didn't see it, and I never told him. I convinced myself I'd imagined it." We stayed up late that night, researching local legends. Most of what we found was typical tourist trap stuff, Sasquatch sightings and ghost stories. But buried in an old local history book Jen had from her grandmother, we found a brief mention of indigenous legends about the lakes on the island. According to these stories, the lakes weren't isolated bodies of water, but connected to the sea through underground tunnels, allowing creatures to move between them unseen. It's been 8 years since that day at Cascade Lake. I've never gone swimming there again, though I still visit the island regularly. Sometimes I drive by the lake and park, just staring out at the water from the safety of my car, wondering if what I saw is still there, watching and waiting. I've told this story to very few people. Most would think I'm crazy or attention-seeking, but I know what I saw. And sometimes when I look at old maps of the island and trace the distance between Cascade Lake and the ocean, I can't help but wonder what else might be making that journey, moving through dark underwater passages, emerging in places where no one expects to find them. Every time I hear about a drowning or a mysterious disappearance in one of the inland lakes in the Pacific Northwest, I think about those unblinking yellow eyes, and I wonder if someone else has just discovered what I already know. That sometimes what's beneath the surface is watching you back. Story 18. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now, and I've seen some weird shit on the road. Sleep deprivation plays tricks on you. Everyone who drives long hours knows that. But what happened to me 3 weeks ago on that mountain road in Pine Hollow wasn't a hallucination or road fatigue. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and I haven't slept properly since. My buddy Tom has this cabin up in the mountains that he lets me use sometimes when I need to decompress. Nothing fancy, just a small place with a wood stove and no internet. Perfect for clearing your head. That Friday, I'd finished a long haul from Sacramento to Portland and had 3 days off, so I decided to head up there for the weekend. I left Portland around 4 in the afternoon. The weather forecast mentioned possible snow, but nothing serious, so I figured my old Ford F-150 could handle it. I've driven that truck through much worse. The main highways were fine, but once I turned onto the Pine Hollow Road, things started feeling different. Pine Hollow is one of those places that's beautiful during the day, but transforms completely after sunset. The road winds through dense forest with these massive pines that block out what little light there is. There are long stretches with no houses, no streetlights, nothing but wilderness. I'd driven it maybe a dozen times before, always in daylight. This time, I was hitting it right as the sun was going down. About 40 minutes into the mountain road, I noticed my temperature gauge creeping up. At first, I ignored it. The truck sometimes runs hot when climbing steep grades, but it kept rising until it was firmly in the red. I muttered "shit" under my breath and started looking for somewhere to pull over. There wasn't much of a shoulder on that road, just thick forest right up to the edge of the pavement. Eventually, I found a small clearing about 20 feet off the road and carefully maneuvered in. When I cut the engine, the silence hit me immediately. If you've ever been in deep forest at night, you know what I mean. It's not just quiet. It's a heavy, pressing kind of silence that makes your ears strain for any sound. The temperature had dropped considerably since I'd left Portland, probably in the low 30s. My breath clouded in front of my face as I popped the hood. The engine was definitely overheating. I keep coolant and water in the truck for situations like this, so I wasn't too worried, just annoyed at the delay. I waited for the engine to cool down enough to open the radiator cap safely, then got out my flashlight and the gallon of water I keep behind the seat. That's when I first felt it, this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, but saw nothing except the endless black trunks of pine trees. The wind picked up slightly, making the branches sway and creating shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I told myself to focus on the truck. The faster I fixed it, the faster I'd be back on the road. I carefully opened the radiator cap and topped it off with water, then checked the coolant reservoir. The whole time, that feeling of being observed never went away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The forest was too quiet. In all my trips to Tom's cabin, I'd always heard something. Birds, small animals rustling in the underbrush, distant owls. That night, there was nothing but the wind through the pines, making this low, moaning sound that somehow made the silence worse. With the radiator filled and the coolant topped off, I closed the hood and got back in the truck, feeling relieved to be inside again. I sat there for a minute, letting the engine warm up, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors and scanning the tree line. Nothing moved out there, but the feeling of being watched had intensified rather than faded. Finally, I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. The temperature gauge was behaving normally again, which was one problem solved, but now I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. I turned on the radio, hoping some music would help, but all I got was static, too far from any stations. I'd been driving for maybe 10 minutes when I noticed something in my rearview mirror, a shadow moving between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. I slowed down slightly, squinting into the mirror, but whatever it was had vanished. Probably just a deer, I told myself, though deer usually don't parallel a moving vehicle. The road ahead curved sharply, and as I rounded the bend, I nearly had a heart attack. There, directly in the middle of the road, stood a man. I slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires skidding on the cold asphalt, and stopped just inches from hitting him. For a moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, staring at this figure illuminated in my headlights. He was tall, maybe 6'3" or 4", wearing what looked like a dark coat that reached almost to the ground. A hood obscured most of his face, but what I could see of it was pale, unnaturally so, like paper or bone. He didn't move, didn't jump out of the way when I nearly hit him, didn't react at all, just stood there facing my truck. I thought maybe he was in shock or needed help. Maybe his car had broken down somewhere and he was trying to flag someone down. That's what the rational part of my brain was saying anyway. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I lowered my window just a crack, enough to call out to him, but not enough for anyone to reach in. Before I could say anything, he took a step toward the truck, then another. His movements were wrong somehow, too fluid in some ways, too jerky in others, like someone who hadn't quite figured out how their limbs worked. As he got closer, I could see his face better. His eyes were what got to me. They looked hollow, sunken into his skull, with dark circles around them like bruises, not the eyes of someone who was just stranded on a mountain road. He reached the driver's side window and slapped his hand against the glass so suddenly I jerked back in my seat. His hand was pale and thin, with long fingers that seemed to have too many joints, and when he spoke, his voice was a dry rasp that barely sounded human. "Please, help me." The way he said it, not like someone in distress, but almost like he was reading words he didn't understand. His mouth moved all wrong, too wide and showing too many teeth. I hit the gas without thinking, the truck lurching forward as I swerved around him. In my mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching my taillights disappear around the next curve. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I'd done the right thing. Whatever was going on with that guy, it wasn't safe to stop on a deserted road at night for a stranger who felt that off. Maybe he needed medical help. Maybe he was on drugs. Either way, I'd call the local sheriff when I got to Tom's cabin and let them know someone was out there. I'd gone maybe a mile when the impossible happened. Rounding another bend in the road, there he was again, the same tall figure in the dark coat standing in the middle of the road. I nearly drove off the road in shock. There was no way, absolutely no way, he could have gotten ahead of me. The road had no shortcuts, and I hadn't seen any vehicle pass me. This time I didn't slow down. I swerved around him, catching just a glimpse of that pale face turning to follow my movement. In my mirror, I watched him recede into the distance, and then he simply wasn't there anymore. Just empty road where a second before there had been a man. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I was going too fast for these mountain roads, but I couldn't make myself slow down. The temperature gauge started climbing again, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get to the cabin, or better yet, to the small town of Riverdale that lay between me and Tom's place. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. The figure appeared 2 more times, once standing at the side of the road, just at the edge of my headlights, and once directly in front of me again. Each time, he would reach toward the truck as I passed, that same hollow-eyed expression on his face. Each time, he would vanish when I looked back, as if he'd never been there at all. By the time I saw the lights of Riverdale ahead, my truck was overheating badly again, steam starting to rise from under the hood. I didn't care. I pushed it the last few miles into town, the engine making alarming noises, and pulled into the first gas station I saw, killing the engine as soon as I was off the road. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. The gas station was one of those old-fashioned ones with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store attached. The lights inside were on, and I could see an older man behind the counter watching TV. When I finally got out of the truck, my legs felt like rubber. The night air was freezing against my sweat-soaked shirt. I looked back toward the road I'd just come down, and there, at the very edge of the tree line where the forest met the town, I saw him. Just standing there, half hidden by a pine tree, watching me. As I stared, he took a single step backward and seemed to melt into the darkness between the trees. I reported what happened to the local sheriff, but they just took it as another story of a stranded mental patient or drug addict wandering the roads. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. I ended up staying in a motel in Riverdale that night rather than continuing to Tom's cabin. I've thought about it constantly since then, tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some homeless guy who knew the forest well enough to take shortcuts through the trees. Maybe there were multiple people who looked similar. Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and my mind was playing tricks on me. but I know what I saw, and I know that whatever was on that road that night wasn't just a stranded traveler. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal, and it wasn't human, not entirely. I've changed my route schedules. I'll drive an extra 100 miles to avoid Pine Hollow now. I've told Tom I can't use his cabin anymore, made up some excuse about back problems and the long drive. He doesn't need to know the real reason, but sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I check my rearview mirror, I swear I can see a tall figure in a dark coat just for a split second before it disappears. And I keep wondering, what would have happened if I'd stopped to help? Story 19. I never believed in ghosts. That's what I keep telling myself even now. But what happened at my grandfather's flat in Oak Ridge has completely changed how I see the world. I'm writing this down because I need someone, anyone, to understand what Olivia and I went through. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. When the pandemic hit last year, Olivia and I found ourselves scrambling for a place to stay. Our landlord decided to sell our rented place with barely any notice, and with Olivia being 4 months pregnant, we needed somewhere safe, fast. My grandfather had passed away 6 months earlier, and his flat in Oak Ridge was sitting empty while the family figured out what to do with it. It seemed like the perfect solution, a rent-free place where we could ride out the lockdown and save money for the baby. The first week was completely normal. The flat was a bit dated, lots of dark wood paneling and heavy curtains that my grandfather had installed in the 70s, but it was clean and quiet. We set up our makeshift office in the spare room, brought our dog Mimi, a 3-year-old border collie who's usually the calmest dog you'll ever meet, and tried to make it feel like home. The first incident happened exactly 8 days after we moved in. It was around 11 at night, and we were getting ready for bed when we heard a distinct banging sound coming from the kitchen, not like pipes or the refrigerator making noise. This was like someone deliberately hitting the counter, 3 loud bangs. "Did you hear that?" Olivia whispered, clutching my arm. I went to check, figuring it was just the old building settling. The kitchen was empty, everything exactly as we'd left it. I checked all the doors and windows, all locked. I told Olivia it was nothing, but I remember not fully believing it myself. 2 nights later, it happened again. Same time, same 3 bangs. This time, Mimi started acting weird too, staring intently at the kitchen doorway, her ears perked up but not barking, just watching something. We started noticing other things, small things at first. We'd leave a door open at night and find it closed in the morning. The TV would suddenly change channels when the remote was on the other side of the room. The temperature in certain parts of the flat would drop dramatically for no reason. I tried to rationalize everything. Old wiring for the TV issues, drafts for the cold spots. Maybe we were closing doors in our sleep, but the explanations felt increasingly hollow, especially after what happened last Tuesday. It was around 12:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight. Olivia and I were watching some documentary on TV while eating lunch. Suddenly, I felt this weird buzzing in my ears, like when you yawn on an airplane. I saw Olivia put her hands to her ears at the same time. "Do you hear that?" I asked. She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "It's like pressure. Weird. Maybe we should turn off the TV for a bit." I barely finished my sentence when the TV shut off by itself. Not just standby mode, completely off. But the Freeview box stayed on, its little blue light still glowing. I checked the TV. It wasn't unplugged or anything. When I tried turning it back on, it worked perfectly. No explanation. That same night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find Mimi standing at the foot of our bed, staring intently at the empty space beside me. Her whole body was rigid, and she was making this low whining sound I'd never heard before. I followed her gaze, but saw nothing. "Mimi, what's wrong, girl?" I whispered, not wanting to wake Olivia. That's when I felt it, this cold, tingling sensation that started at my feet and traveled up my entire body. It wasn't like a normal chill. It felt deliberate, like someone was running ice-cold fingers up my legs, my back, my neck. I couldn't move. couldn't breathe. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally stopped, Mimi jumped onto the bed and pressed herself against me, still staring at that empty space. I didn't sleep again that night. I didn't tell Olivia about that incident. With the baby coming, I didn't want to stress her out more than necessary, but it turns out she was having her own experiences. Last Thursday, she was alone in the flat while I went grocery shopping. When I got back, she was sitting in the living room, pale and shaking. "Someone was here," she said immediately. I heard the front door open and close, then footsteps in the hallway, going to the kitchen. I heard someone filling the kettle, opening and closing cupboards. I thought you'd come back early, so I called out. When nobody answered, I got scared and stayed in here. The noises went on for at least 5 minutes, then stopped. I checked the entire flat, nobody there, nothing disturbed. The kettle was cold, all doors and windows were still locked from the inside. The kitchen lights started flickering that same night, not in a horror movie way, just subtle enough to make you question if you really saw it. We'd be cooking dinner and the light would dim slightly, then come back to full brightness. Sometimes it happened once. Sometimes it would go on for minutes. The knocking became more frequent too, no longer just in the kitchen. Now it would happen at the front door. 3 knocks, always 3. I'd rush to answer it, but there was never anyone there. Not once. Mimi's behavior got increasingly strange. She started following something around the room with her eyes. She'd track whatever it was from one end of the room to another, her head moving slowly like she was watching someone walk. Sometimes she'd wag her tail like she recognized whoever or whatever it was. Last weekend, things escalated further. Olivia and I were sitting in the living room when we both heard the sound of someone rummaging through drawers in the kitchen. Not subtle. This was loud, deliberate. Drawers opening and closing, metal utensils clanking against each other. I grabbed a cricket bat I keep by the sofa, started keeping it there after the first few incidents, and slowly made my way to the kitchen. The sounds continued until the exact moment I stepped through the doorway. Then, complete silence, empty kitchen, all drawers closed. But the drawer with the utensils was perfectly organized, all spoons, forks, and knives arranged by size. I know for a fact they weren't like that earlier when I made lunch. They were jumbled like they always are. That night, we took Mimi and slept in our car. We were that scared. We came back the next morning, feeling foolish in the daylight. But something new had happened. Mimi's brush, a bright blue thing we keep on a high shelf in the bathroom, was sitting in the middle of the living room floor. The shelf is over 6 feet high. There's no way Mimi could have reached it, and it was pushed back far enough that it couldn't have just fallen. Out of desperation, I started recording the flat at night. Not video, just pointing my phone around rooms and taking photos with the flash on. When I reviewed them, about half the photos showed these strange orbs of light floating in otherwise empty rooms, not dust or reflection. These were perfect spheres of light, sometimes clustered together, sometimes solitary. Yesterday was the worst. It was around 2 in the afternoon. Olivia was napping in the bedroom. The pregnancy makes her tired. And I was working in the spare room. I heard her scream, not a startled yelp, but a full-throated scream of terror. I ran to the bedroom to find her pressed against the headboard, pointing at the empty space at the foot of the bed. There was someone standing there, she gasped. An old man, just standing there watching me sleep. He was transparent. I could see the dresser through him. But he was there, Matthew. He was there. She described him in detail, tall, thin, balding, with wire-rimmed glasses and wearing an old-fashioned suit. The description matched my grandfather perfectly, down to the watch chain he always wore. I never showed Olivia many photos of him, and she certainly never met him. Last night, around midnight, we were in bed with all the lights on, neither of us able to sleep. The temperature in the rooms suddenly dropped so low we could see our breath. The bedroom door, which had been closed, slowly swung open. Mimi, who was on the bed with us, started growling, something she never does. That's when we heard it. Shuffling footsteps crossing the room toward our bed. Slow, deliberate steps. The mattress depressed at the foot of the bed like someone was sitting on it. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Olivia was squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. We just sat there, frozen, as the invisible weight shifted on our bed. Then Olivia whispered, "Grandpa James, is that you?" The pressure on the bed immediately lifted. The room temperature returned to normal, so suddenly it felt like someone had flipped a switch. Mimi stopped growling and put her head down on her paws. We're still here in the flat. With the pandemic, we don't have many options. I don't know if what's happening is my grandfather trying to communicate or something else entirely. Some days nothing happens at all, and we start to think maybe we imagined everything. Then something new occurs that chills us to the bone. Last night, I swear I heard someone whisper my name right next to my ear as I was falling asleep. A familiar voice, my grandfather's voice. I don't know what to do. I don't know what he wants. All I know is that Olivia is due in 3 months, and I'm terrified about bringing our baby into this flat. But I'm equally terrified about what might follow us if we leave. Story 20. I still can't bring myself to go camping anymore. Not after what happened at Pine Hollow last October. I've tried explaining it to my therapist, but she just nods and asks how it makes me feel. How does it make me feel? Terrified, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every twig snap when I walk my dog. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I work at a marketing firm in Burlington. Nothing special, just your typical office environment with the usual politics and personalities. Brian was our team lead, this big bearded guy with a booming laugh who everyone gravitated toward. He'd lost 2 fingers on his right hand in some industrial accident before joining our company. Never talked much about it, but you'd catch him absently rubbing the stumps when he was stressed. Brian organized this team-building camping trip to Pine Hollow. It's this remote spot about 3 hours from the city, deep in the national forest. Honestly, I wasn't thrilled about going. Sleeping on the ground with co-workers isn't exactly my idea of fun, but saying no to Brian wasn't really an option if you valued your position on the team. 6 of us went: Brian, me, Caitlin from accounting, Marcus and Deb from creative, and Todd from IT. We carpooled in 2 vehicles, and I rode with Brian and Caitlin. The drive started normal enough. We talked about work projects, office gossip, the usual stuff. But about an hour in, when we turned onto this narrow Forest Service road, Brian got quiet, like unnervingly quiet. "You okay?" I asked him. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Just watching for deer. They're bad on these roads." But I swear his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We reached the trailhead around 5 in the afternoon. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the pines. Brian seemed hesitant to start the hike, checking and rechecking his pack, staring into the trees. "Maybe we should have come earlier," Caitlin said, glancing at the darkening sky. "We'll be fine," Brian replied, but there was something off in his voice. "It's only a mile to the campsite." That mile felt like 5. The trail was overgrown in spots, like it hadn't seen much traffic. We had to use flashlights for the last 20 minutes as the forest got darker and darker around us. I kept feeling like something was watching us from between the trees, but told myself it was just my imagination working overtime. The campsite was a small clearing surrounded by ancient pines. No facilities, no other campers, just wilderness. We hurried to set up tents before losing all light. Brian kept stopping to listen, head cocked like a dog hearing a distant whistle. "What's with you, man?" Marcus asked him. "You're jumpy as hell." "Just thought I heard something," Brian muttered. "Probably a deer." Once we had the tents up, we gathered around the fire. That's when things started feeling really wrong. The forest was dead silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the crackling of our fire and our own voices, which seemed to echo strangely between the trees. "Is it always this quiet out here?" Deb asked, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Brian's eyes kept darting to the darkness beyond our little circle of light. "Sometimes," he said, "nature has its moods." We tried to keep the mood light. Todd broke out some whiskey. Marcus told bad jokes, and for a while it felt almost normal. Almost. But Brian barely touched his drink, and I noticed he'd positioned himself so he could see into the woods behind us. Around 11, we heard the first strange sound. A branch snapping maybe 50 yards from camp. Could have been anything, right? But Brian was on his feet instantly, staring into the darkness, hand drifting to the hunting knife on his belt. Probably just a raccoon, Todd said, but his voice had that forced casual tone people use when they're trying not to sound scared. Yeah, Brian agreed after a long moment. Probably. But he didn't sit back down right away. He stood there, scanning the tree line, before finally returning to the fire. The conversation never quite recovered after that. Every few minutes there'd be another sound, rustling leaves, another snap, always moving, circling around us. "Is someone else camping nearby?" Caitlin whispered to me. I shook my head. We didn't see any other cars at the trailhead. Around midnight we decided to turn in. Brian said he'd take first watch. No one questioned why we suddenly needed a watch. It just seemed necessary. "I'll wake you in a couple hours," he told Marcus, who nodded gravely. I zipped myself into my tent with Caitlin, both of us fully dressed, not even bothering with sleeping bags. Through the thin fabric, I could see Brian's silhouette by the fire, knife in hand, scanning the darkness. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Caitlin was shaking me awake, her hand clamped over my mouth. "Listen," she hissed. At first, I heard nothing. Then it came, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. It was like a howl, but not from any animal I've ever heard. It started low, almost human, then rose to a pitch that set my teeth on edge. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the tent wall I could see Brian standing rigid by the now dying fire. The others were emerging from their tents, faces pale in the faint glow of embers. "Brian?" Marcus called, his voice cracking. "What is that?" Brian didn't answer. He was staring into the forest, his whole body tense. The howl came again, closer this time, much closer. And then another answered it from the opposite direction. They were circling us. "Get back in your tents," Brian finally said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." No one moved. "Now!" he barked, and we all scrambled back. I peeked through a gap in the tent flap. Brian had rekindled the fire and was feeding it frantically, building it higher than before. The light cast wild shadows that seemed to move among the trees, or maybe it wasn't just shadows. "Did you see that?" Caitlin whispered, clutching my arm so hard it hurt. "See what?" "By that big pine, something moved." I squinted, but saw nothing except darkness beyond the firelight. Then the howling started again, this time from multiple directions at once. It was 3 in the morning according to my watch, that darkest hour when the night seems endless. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, that horrible howling, punctuated by what sounded like feet moving through the underbrush. Heavy feet. Two-legged, Brian never left his post by the fire, knife in hand, occasionally throwing more wood on the flames to keep them high. Around 5 in the morning, the sky began to lighten slightly. The howling stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The forest remained unnaturally silent. As dawn broke, Brian finally relaxed his stance, though he kept scanning the trees. We emerged from our tents, exhausted and terrified. "What the hell was that, Brian?" Todd demanded. "You know something. You've been acting weird since we got here." Brian shook his head, rubbing the stumps where his fingers used to be. "Just some coyotes, probably." "Bullshit," Marcus said. "Those weren't coyotes." Brian wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Let's pack up. We should get back to the cars." I needed to pee desperately, but was too scared to go into the woods alone. I walked just to the edge of our clearing, and that's when I saw them. Footprints in the soft mud near a small stream. They were huge, easily twice the size of my boot, and unmistakably humanoid. But no human has feet that large, with toes that long and splayed. "Guys," I called, my voice shaking. "You need to see this." Everyone came over, except Brian, who was frantically packing his tent. "Holy shit." Todd whispered, crouching down to examine the prints. "These are all around our camp." And they were. Once we started looking, we could see where something, or several somethings, had circled our campsite all night, never coming closer than about 20 feet from the fire's light. "Brian!" Marcus shouted. "Get over here!" Brian reluctantly joined us, his face ashen. When he saw the footprints, he just closed his eyes for a moment. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." "Not until you tell us what the fuck is going on," Deb insisted. Brian looked around, as if making sure we were still alone. "I didn't think they'd be active," he finally said. "It's not their usual season." "They? Who's they?" Caitlin asked. "The locals call them hollow men," Brian said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've seen them before." That's when I noticed the scars on his right hand. Not just the missing fingers, but long jagged marks that ran up his forearm. "That accident you had," I began. Brian shook his head. "Wasn't an accident. I was camping here alone 3 years ago. They took my fingers. Would have taken more if I hadn't kept the fire going until dawn." We stood in stunned silence, trying to process what he was saying. "Why would you bring us back here?" Marcus finally asked, his voice rising with anger and fear. "I didn't think they'd be around in October," Brian said. "They usually hibernate by now, and I needed to face this place again. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put you all at risk." We packed up in record time, barely speaking. The hike back to the trailhead was tense, everyone jumping at the slightest sound. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced we were being watched. When we reached the cars, the relief was overwhelming. But as we were loading our gear, I glanced back toward the forest one last time. There, at the edge of the trees, something moved. Just for a second, tall and thin, with limbs too long to be human, skin the color of tree bark. I blinked, and it was gone. No one else seemed to have seen it. We drove back in complete silence. Brian white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire way, checking the rearview mirror obsessively. None of us has talked about what happened that night. We all still work together, but there's this unspoken thing between us now. Brian requested a transfer to another department last month. I heard he's moving out of state. But the worst part, sometimes when I'm home alone at night, I hear it. That same howling sound, distant but unmistakable. And in the morning, there are sometimes muddy prints on my porch, too big to be human, with long splayed toes. I've installed better locks, motion sensor lights, even cameras, but deep down, I know that if they want to get me, these things won't stop them. The hollow men found me once, and I think they're patient enough to wait for their chance to find me again. Story 21. I don't talk about this much. It's been almost 20 years, but writing it down still makes my hands shake. I was 10 years old when it happened, and even though I'm 30 now, I still can't sleep with my bedroom door open. Our house wasn't anything special, just a typical split level from the 70s with wood paneling and outdated carpet. My parents bought it because it was cheap, and because it had enough bedrooms for me and my sister. The catch was that my bedroom wasn't really a bedroom, it was the basement. I didn't mind at first. The basement was big, and I had the whole space to myself. My parents had put up some drywall to make it feel like a proper room, but it was still unmistakably a basement. Concrete floors covered with thin carpet, one tiny window near the ceiling, and a door at the top of the stairs that led to the main floor. That basement was always cold. Not just cool, but cold in a way that seeped into your bones. My mom would bring down extra blankets and my dad installed a space heater, but nothing helped. It was like the cold was coming from inside the walls. I remember that afternoon in October like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday, and I had come home from school while my mom was picking up my sister from soccer practice. Dad was still at work. I had the house to myself, which wasn't unusual. I dumped my backpack at the kitchen table, grabbed a snack, and headed down to my room. The stairs to the basement always creaked. Every single step had its own distinct sound. I used to count them, 14 steps down to my room. I knew exactly which ones to avoid if I was trying to sneak upstairs after bedtime. I settled on the floor with my Legos, building some spaceship I'd been working on all week. The basement had this weird smell. Not bad, just different from the rest of the house. Kind of earthy and metallic at the same time. My mom said it was just basement smell, but it always felt more specific than that. Like something's breath. I'd been playing for maybe 20 minutes when the temperature dropped, and I don't mean it got a little chillier, I mean it plummeted. I could suddenly see my breath in front of my face, these little clouds of vapor that shouldn't have been there. I remember thinking that the furnace must have broken again. Then I felt it. The sensation of being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? How the back of your neck gets all prickly. It was like that, but 100 times stronger. Every hair on my body stood up. My stomach knotted. I froze with a Lego piece in my hand, afraid to move. The feeling was coming from behind me, from the darkest corner of the basement where my parents stored old Christmas decorations and boxes of stuff they never unpacked after moving in. That corner was always dark, no matter how many lights we turned on. It was like the darkness there was thicker somehow. I slowly turned my head, expecting to see, I don't know what. Nothing was there, just shadows and boxes. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger, like whatever was watching me was pleased that I had noticed. My bedroom door was across the room. It was one of those hollow doors with a glass pane in the upper half. My parents had installed it to let in more light. My sister and I had stuck this little plastic sun decoration on the glass with a suction cup. We'd painted it together one summer. It was yellow with an orange smiley face. As I sat there, frozen with fear, the door began to move. It swung open slowly and smoothly. This was impossible for two reasons. First, that door always creaked. The hinges were old and rusty, and my dad kept promising to oil them but never did. Second, the door was closed. I had closed it when I came down. I always closed it because the basement was cold, and I wanted to keep whatever heat I could trapped in my room. But there it was, swinging open without a sound. Not a creak, not a whisper, just smooth, deliberate movement, like someone was carefully pulling it open while trying not to make noise. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there watching the door open wider and wider until it was about halfway open. Then it stopped. The silence was overwhelming. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator upstairs. I could even hear the tick of my Star Wars clock on the wall, but nothing else. Then the sun decoration, the one my sister and I had made, suddenly peeled itself off the glass. It didn't fall. It peeled away from the top down, like invisible fingers were deliberately pulling it off. Then it dropped to the floor with a small plastic clatter that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. That's when I ran. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember dropping the Lego piece. 1 second I was sitting frozen on the floor, and the next I was taking the stairs 2 at a time, my feet barely touching the steps. I didn't care about the creaks. I didn't care about anything except getting away from whatever was in my room. The feeling of being chased was overwhelming, not like someone was physically running after me, but like something was reaching for me, stretching out from the darkness to grab the back of my shirt. I could feel it at my heels, at my back, breathing down my neck. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs and slammed it shut behind me. I ran through the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door onto the porch. I was hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face when my mom's car pulled into the driveway. She knew something was wrong immediately. She left my sister in the car and ran to me, asking what happened, if I was hurt. All I could do was point at the house and say, "There's something in my room." Most parents would have brushed it off. They would have told me it was my imagination or that I'd had a bad dream. My mom didn't. She looked at me for a long moment, then at the house. She got this expression on her face. Not fear exactly, but recognition, like I had confirmed something she already suspected. "Stay here with your sister," she said, and went inside. I stood on the porch, shaking, while my sister peppered me with questions from the car. I couldn't answer. I just watched the front door, terrified that my mom wouldn't come back out, but she did about 10 minutes later. She looked calm, but there was something in her eyes. a tightness around the edges. "I checked your room," she said. "There's nothing there." "The door," I said. "It opened by itself, and the sun fell." She nodded. "The decoration is on the floor, the door is open, but there's nothing else, Lucas." I turned on all the lights. I looked everywhere. She took me inside, keeping her hand on my shoulder the whole time. She made hot chocolate and sat with me at the kitchen table. My sister, sensing the mood, went to watch TV in the living room without being asked. "Has anything like this happened before?" my mom asked quietly. I thought about it. There had been moments. Times when I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. Times when I'd wake up feeling like someone was standing at the foot of my bed, but I'd always dismissed those things. Everyone has those experiences, right? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe, but not like this." She nodded again, like this made perfect sense. "If it happens again, you tell me right away, okay?" I didn't go back to my room that night. I slept on the couch, and my mom didn't object. When my dad got home, they had a long, whispered conversation in the kitchen. I pretended to be asleep, but I heard bits and pieces. My mom told him what happened, and he didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just listened, serious and quiet. The next morning, life went on like normal. I went to school, came home, did homework, but I dreaded going back to my room. My dad came down with me that first night, checked all the corners, and stayed until I fell asleep. But the feeling never went away, the sense that something was there, watching and waiting. A few weeks later, I was doing homework at the dining table when my dad called my mom over. They were both staring at a bottle of Tabasco sauce in the middle of the table. As I watched, the bottle slid about 6 inches across the smooth surface. Not like it was pushed by the table being bumped. It moved in a straight line, smooth and deliberate, then stopped. My parents looked at each other, then at me. No one said anything. It wasn't until years later that my mom told me the rest. How she would hear the basement door open and close when no one was home. How she would hear footsteps, not random creaks, but measured, deliberate steps, pacing in the basement at night. How sometimes she would wake up feeling like someone was standing in the doorway of her bedroom, watching her sleep. About a month after the incident with the door, my mom went down to the basement alone. It was night, and everyone else was asleep. She didn't turn on any lights. She stood in the middle of my room and spoke out loud to the darkness. "I don't know what you are," she said, "but you're not welcome here. I belong to Jesus Christ, and this house is protected. Leave." She said she felt something in that moment, a shift in the air, like something moving back, retreating. The cold didn't go away completely, but it lessened. The door stopped opening on its own. The footsteps faded. We never figured out what it was. We never had the house blessed or called in paranormal investigators. We just lived with the knowledge that for a while, something else had lived there too. I moved out of the basement when I was 16, into my sister's old room after she left for college. My parents converted the basement into a storage space, and no one slept down there again. I still think about it sometimes. The silently swinging door, the decoration peeling off the glass, the Tabasco bottle sliding across the table. I wonder what would have happened if the entity, or whatever it was, had decided to show more of itself. What would I have seen in that dark corner of the basement? What was reaching for me as I ran up those stairs? I don't know, and part of me is grateful for that. Some things are better left in the shadows. Story 22. I've been driving 18-wheelers for almost 20 years now. Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming. I've seen it all, driven through everything from dust storms to blizzards. But what happened to me last winter is why I'm looking to get out of long-haul driving altogether. I still can't sleep right, still wake up hearing those sounds. It was early January, one of those bitter cold Nebraska nights where the temperature drops well below zero. I'd been pushing hard for 14 hours straight, trying to make good time to Denver. Had to get there by noon the next day, or the customer would refuse the load, and I couldn't afford another strike with my dispatcher. The forecast was calling for a major storm system, so I was racing against both the clock and Mother Nature. Around 1 in the morning, my eyes started getting heavy. You know that feeling when you catch yourself nodding off? Terrifying when you're controlling 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo. I spotted a sign for a truck stop coming up in 5 miles and decided to pull in for a few hours of sleep. It was one of those independent places, not a chain. Small building with a cafe attached, just off I-80. When I pulled in, I immediately noticed how empty it was. Usually these places are packed overnight, especially with bad weather coming. But there were only 2 other trucks in the lot, a white Peterbilt and an older Kenworth. No cars in the car lot either. I figured most drivers had probably pushed on ahead of the storm or found somewhere else to hunker down. I was starving, so I headed into the cafe first. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the whole place feel even more desolate. There was just one waitress behind the counter, gray-haired lady, probably in her 60s. Her name tag said, Darlene. No other customers in sight. Coffee, black, and whatever you've got hot, I said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. She poured me a cup without saying anything, then disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back with a plate of eggs and hash browns, she finally spoke. Highway patrol's closing I-80 in about an hour, she said. Storm's coming in faster than they thought. They're saying it's going to be the worst in 30 years. Guess I'm staying put then, I replied, planning to sleep in my truck for a few hours anyway. That's when she got this strange look on her face. She glanced around like she was making sure no one else could hear, even though the place was completely empty. If I were you, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, I'd find somewhere else to sleep tonight. I asked her what she meant, and she hesitated before continuing. Back in 1997, during a storm just like this one, a driver disappeared from this very lot. Bob was his name, regular customer, nice man with 3 kids. They found what was left of him about 2 weeks later, 5 miles away in an open field. No explanation how he got there. I'll admit, I almost laughed. Thought she was just spinning a yarn to pass the time. But the look in her eyes was dead serious. That wasn't the only one, she continued. Every few years when the big storms hit, always the same, driver goes missing, body turns up miles away weeks later. I thanked her for the warning but told her I'd be fine. I've heard plenty of trucker ghost stories over the years. Every stretch of highway has its own urban legend. I paid my bill and headed back to my rig as the snow started coming down heavy. I climbed into my sleeper berth and set my alarm for 6 a.m., figuring that would give me enough time to see if the roads were clear. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately because the next thing I knew, my CB radio crackled to life. I checked my watch. It was around 2 in the morning. The static on the CB cleared and a voice came through. It was faint, almost a whisper, but clear enough that I could make out the words. They come when you sleep. They're hungry, always hungry. What freaked me out was when the voice gave coordinates. They matched exactly where I was parked. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. My first thought was that one of the other drivers was playing a prank. I grabbed my flashlight and coat and stepped out into the blizzard to check. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The wind cut right through my jacket, but what I could see stopped me cold. The lot was empty. The white Peterbilt and the Kenworth were gone, and the cafe was dark, completely closed up. I trudged through the snow to the cafe door and tried it, locked tight. It looked like it had been closed for hours, but that was impossible. I'd been in there less than 3 hours ago. The open sign was dark, and when I shined my flashlight inside, I could see chairs stacked on tables, the kind of closing up they do at the end of the day, not for a quick break. That's when I noticed the footprints in the snow. 3 sets, leading from where the other trucks had been parked. They weren't heading toward the cafe or the road. They were heading straight for my truck. I ran back to my rig, heart pounding. When I got there, my door was open. I know for a fact I'd locked it before going to sleep. I always do. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, but it felt wrong somehow. The air was colder than it should have been, even with the door having been open. I jumped in and tried to start the engine, thinking I'd take my chances on the highway rather than stay there another minute. The key turned, but nothing happened. No click, no struggling starter, nothing. I tried the lights, the radio, even the CB. All dead. Everything electronic in my truck had failed simultaneously. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the roof of my cab. Slow, deliberate steps, moving from the back toward the front. Then came the scratching. It sounded like claws or long fingernails dragging across metal. I told myself it was just tree branches, but I knew there weren't any trees close enough to reach my truck. The scratching stopped, and for a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then, with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting metal, the roof of my cab dented inward. Another impact followed, and another. Whatever was up there was punching into my roof with impossible strength. I scrambled into the passenger seat as a crack formed across my windshield. The temperature inside the cab plummeted so fast I could see my breath. The crack in the windshield widened, branching out like a spider's web, and through it came the faintest whisper of a voice. "We've been waiting for you." My name. It said my goddamn name. The windshield shattered inward in a spray of glass and swirling snow. I covered my face with my arms, feeling the sting as shards cut into my skin. When I lowered my arms, I saw them. 3 figures climbing in through the broken windshield. They were humanoid but wrong in every possible way. Emaciated bodies with limbs too long, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. Their skin was pale to the point of being translucent, stretched tight over visible bones. But it was their faces that still haunt me. No nose, just slits, and eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. Their mouths, Jesus. Their mouths were filled with too many teeth, like multiple rows of needles. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw afterward, so I must have. I lunged for the door handle, yanked it open, and fell backward into the snow. One of them grabbed my ankle, its grip so cold it burned through my jeans instantly. I kicked frantically and somehow broke free, scrambling to my feet and running blindly into the storm. I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to explode, not daring to look back. Eventually, I saw lights ahead, a real truck stop, a big chain one, with at least 20 rigs parked outside and people visible through the windows. I burst through the doors, soaking wet, covered in blood from the glass cuts, and probably looking completely insane. The state police found my truck the next day, exactly where I'd left it. The windshield was shattered, the roof dented inward just like I described, but they attributed it to storm damage, maybe falling ice or debris. They said I was lucky to have made it to safety before hypothermia set in. The medical examiner who checked me out said the cuts on my arms were consistent with glass injuries, but the burn mark around my ankle where that thing grabbed me, he had no explanation. I asked about the other truck stop, the one where it happened. The police just looked at me strangely. According to them, there hasn't been a truck stop at that location for over 15 years. It burned down in a fire back in 2003. No one ever rebuilt it. I still drive trucks, but never that stretch of I-80, and never at night if I can help it. I've heard other drivers talk about strange CB calls during blizzards, about feeling like they're being watched when they park overnight. Most just laugh it off as ghost stories, but I know better. I know what's out there in the darkness, waiting for tired drivers to pull over and close their eyes. I know what hunts along that lonely stretch of highway when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the night. And they know my name.